Copyright 2023 Frequency 99. Asha of Atlantis by David Edward. Imprint Frequency 99, Ocala, Florida, USA. All rights reserved. This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. 9600 BCE. Asha couldn't believe the wrapped scroll held the king's seal. She stared at it, mesmerized, not hearing her father's words. The seal contained a profile view of the king. In the background were the city's distinct rings, the king's palace on a center island, and two concentric circles of alternating land and water. "Asha," her father said after realizing she wasn't listening. "Yes, father," Asha returned, pulling her eyes away from the seal and the tanned leather scroll to look up at him. "You must pay attention," her father scolded her. "This is the most important task our family has ever been given. You know what I had to do to receive the king's charter. You know how hard all of us have worked." "I know, father, I'm listening. I'm sorry. Seeing the king's seal on your work just made everything all the more real." "It's all our work, daughter. You toiled just as hard as I or your brother or your mother. Rest her soul." Caius, her father, softened at the mention of Asha's mother, his wife. Asha straightened her back and stood proud. She was tall and slender with a runner's physique. "I will not let you down, father or mother. I am the fastest of us, and I can run for days. I am crafty. You have taught me well. The Babaroi will never track me." Caius hardened again at the mention of the Babaroi. "Do not take them lightly, daughter. You are fast and smart and strong, but the Babaroi are just as fast, just as smart, and they are stronger." "Bah!" Asha dismissed his statement. "They are fast, yes, but not as smart as me. And while they are strong, if they can lay hands on you, they are slow and clumsy compared to me. I am the right choice, father. You know how I excelled in athletics. I am the most sought-after thrower in sports games. I have taken the oath and am ready. Yes, Astan, her twin brother, can match the Babaroi in strength, but only that. I am the right choice when everything is considered as one," she reasserted. Her father smiled and put his arms on her shoulders, the warrior's embrace. Asha pushed his hands to the side and reached in and hugged him. "I am your daughter first," she said. Caius allowed the embrace to linger for a bit, then pushed her away. "We will be reunited in Kemet, in the Black Lands, in half a cycle. In 6 moons, if we are both successful, then we may embrace as a family again. For now, daughter, you are your own family, beholden to none." He turned and indicated her brother Astan with a group of the king's soldiers far down the harbor wall. "They are ready. I must go. It is too late in the day for you to leave. Rest at our home. It is yours now. Leave before first light tomorrow." "I will, father." Asha held back tears. She knew the odds of seeing her father again were very slim. "I will burn an offering to Mother tonight in your absence." Caius had turned to leave, but he stopped and turned back to face her so she could see his eyes and know that he loved her. "To the king first, Asha, then your mother." "Of course, father. I meant it no other way." Her father waved to her and made his way to the inner harbor pier where the boat was moored. She watched him talk to Astan, then the king's soldiers. They all nodded and got on the large boat. The boat was at least 30 cubits long. It had huge, white, majestic sails, which were currently tied down but would be untied once they reached the open water, which would be in about a week or so. First, they had to row down the broad river that connected the city to the ocean. The waterway flowed from the lake surrounding the city. The lake was fed by many rivers that flowed from the plateau and the runoff from mountains to the north. The sound of the waterfalls could be heard on the northern side of the city, but not here on the southern side. Asha waited, staying back so as not to undo her last goodbyes. She watched as the boat made ready. Eventually, it unmoored and began its long journey. She watched until it was out of sight, mingled in with the other hundreds of boats coming and going from the capital city. If everything worked out, her father and brother would arrive in Kemet by boat a full 2 moons before her. He had the same copy of his work that she did, with the same seal and written on the same type of material. One of these scrolls must make it through, so they were doubling their chances by sending her over land and her father over water. However, they would have their own challenges. The waterways once in the open sea were full of pirates and privateers, in some ways more threatening than the Babaroi. But in some ways not, she finished her own thought out loud. We will see each other again, Father, she promised the air around her. It was early afternoon. The weather was just turning from planting season to harvesting season, which meant much cooler nights, and the days wouldn't be hot again for many moons. Still pleasantly warm in the sun, the rains would return after the heat did. This was the best time of the cycle. Asha held the bag she had the scroll in. The bag was very secure. It had 2 straps, one over her shoulder and one around her middle. The pouch part of the bag rested firmly under her right arm, which she kept close to her side and pressed against the carryall. This was the only time she had been allowed onto the center island in her life. She would never be able to pass beyond the interior wall of the palace proper. But even being this close changed her perspective. The inner harbor was huge, and it held ships of all sizes, from large galley merchant ships to the smaller 5-person vessels that the king's guards used to patrol and keep order. She studied the harbor, committing it to memory. This may be the last time I see any of my homeland, she realized. I never want to forget this place. She hadn't realized the spectacular view the center island provided of the rest of the city and the huge plain to the northeast. Directly to the north, she could see the green mountains rising up and the white waterfalls spilling over their edges. To the east, she could see the massive aqueduct and endless leagues of green crops spread over the flat land. She knew they went beyond where the eye could see, and that tomorrow she would start the journey through them to the other side of civilization. She walked up the seawall and past several rows of guards. The guards watched her suspiciously. They knew who she was, but their training required them to trust no one and to be ever vigilant. She nodded to them in passing anyway, and as she approached each set, she opened her hands and held them palm up to her front so they could see she carried no weapons. This was not required, but it was both good manners and a good idea. Many the drunk or clumsy visitors had been killed for looking the wrong way or stumbling into one of the royal guards. She crossed the bridge over the opening to the inner harbor and followed the road to the second bridge. Each ring of land, including the center island, had bridges built to span openings for the boats to pass under. A channel had been dug from the front entrance to the inner harbor. Digging it had required cutting pieces out of the rings for the boats to pass through, but people still had to be able to walk the entire circle. Once she was on the southernmost point, she transitioned onto the huge road where the bridges were wood and spanned the alternating sections of land and water on each ring. The road was a massive structure made from dropping rocks into the water between the rings. It was told that it had taken years to complete. Once enough rocks were placed, then dirt was brought in over them, and a proper road was laid. The road still had bridges and guardhouses in places, and was wide enough for 12 horses to go side by side from its start to its end. Asha ran her hand along the short, stacked stone wall on the side of the road she was on. The red, black, and white stones came up to her waist and ran along both sides of the road. She looked over and down into the water between the center island and the first ring of land. She stopped and leaned into the wall, putting her elbows on the top and taking the whole scene in. There you go, daydreaming again when you have important work to do. A girl's voice rang out behind her. Asha turned. She recognized the voice. Sada. She stepped away from the wall and embraced the younger female. Sada looked at Asha, and her eyes fell to the pouch under her arm. Is it in there? Asha stiffened at the question. We should not speak of anything sacred here on a bridge over water. Sada instantly realized her mistake. Oh, I'm sorry. I know better. You are right. Can I walk with you? Maybe we can find a place where it is safe to talk. I was just heading home, Asha said. Then we will spend your last night here together. Sada's face lightened. I would welcome the company. Sada, Asha said, then had a thought. You know I have taken the oath? Sada was visibly upset. I didn't realize. That's okay, we can find something else to do. She was visibly trying not to show her disappointment. Has Aston already departed? Asha smiled to herself. Sada was an opportunist for sure. Yes, just now. I just saw him and father off a few moments ago. That is where I am coming from, the inner harbor. Sada looked to the center island and the harbor. You were just there? Wow! It's all so exciting. I wish I could come with you. It was a backdoor question, not a wistful statement. Asha looked at her friend. The two shared a lot in common with each other. Asha was a few cycles older than Sada, and those years made a substantial difference. Where Sada still looked young, Asha's shoulders were broad and her arms were sleek and muscled. She was very much a woman and stood a head taller than Sada. As the daughter of one of the king's artisans, Asha wore the purple sash of her family's rank and had her commitment's yellow and red tattoos fresh on the dark skin of her face. It's going to be dangerous, Sada. Otherwise, I'd love to have you come with me, Asha finally said. Sada got a mischievous look in her eye. Let me spend your last night here with you. Whatever tomorrow brings, it brings. Asha heard the soft dripping of the water clock. It would turn into more than a few drips in just a moment if she didn't get up. Sada was asleep next to her. It had turned out the company was welcome. Asha hadn't realized how alone she felt with her father and brother gone. She sat up and looked over to the opposite wall of her father's bedroom. The candles on the small shrine she had lit for her mother last night were still burning. A good omen for her trip. Poseidon himself might have visited and extended the candle burning time. Asha reached over and nudged Sada, who grunted that she was awake but didn't move otherwise. Asha felt the omens were good, so she extended a courtesy to her friend. Come on, sleepyhead, it's time. Why don't you come with me to the end of the farms? If you want to? That got a rise out of Sada. She sat up quickly, the thin blanket falling away and revealing her nude form. Gross! Asha yelled in fake outrage. You gotta wear clothes if you come with me. I told you I took the oath. Sada was still very sleepy. She looked down at herself and then over to Asha, a smile forming on her face. Whoops, she said. You were out. I had planned on getting up before you so you wouldn't see. Asha pushed Sada away playfully, then jumped out of bed before she could recover. Asha was wearing her night clothes, a loose-fitting one-piece long shirt made from cotton. Well, I see. So please, this trip is serious, you know that. I am doing the king's work on a warrant that bears the king's seal. Yes, I want you to walk me through the farms. That will give us another whole moon together. But not if you aren't going to be serious about it. I have to focus, and I'll be racing the Bobberoys after, so I'll need to be resolute. The oath provides that. It's hard enough. I can't have anyone with me, making it harder, or trying to tempt me off the true path. Sada stood up and found where she had put her clothes. I'm sorry, you are right. You can count on me. I really want to go with you. To the end of the farms, no more. Yes, I have never even been a third of the way there. That, in and of itself, will be quite the adventure. Then Sada's face twisted into a question. Have you ever been that far? To the end of the farms? The edge of the kingdom? After emptying the water clock, Asha turned back to face Sada, who frustratingly was still not dressed. You know I haven't. I plan to run the first half, then walk the second, so I am not fatigued when we get to the mountains. And the Bobberoy, Sada said very seriously. It looked like everything was starting to get real for her. Asha made a dismissive sound. I have already thought about all of this 100 times. Come on, if we hurry, we can be up on the crest of Agunit before the sun is up. We can watch it rise over the city. I am told it's a stunning sight. It will be the perfect beginning to my journey. Agunit was the highest mountain peak directly to the north of the city, on the other side of the huge lake the city islands were in. Asha commissioned a taxi to ferry them over. It took several hours and was very expensive. Once off the taxi, they walked together up the mountain path. This was a well-traveled destination that many foreign tourists made a point to visit. Everything was green and lush. The air was cool, but not cold. There were dozens of merchants and shopkeepers all out in front of their wares along the path. When the merchants saw Asha and Sada, they each made about the same face of disinterest and quickly refocused farther down the trail. No one was interested in locals. There was little money in them. The two walked all the way up the trail and onto the large wooden platform on the crest of the rise. The city and island below were breathtaking. The sun was starting to rise, which accentuated the shadows the city buildings and infrastructure created, and sparkled as it hit the bright blue waters of the lake and river. It's going to be a beautiful day. Sada squealed after watching the view for a few moments, the splendor of civilization in front of her causing her endorphins to rise. The bright morning sunlight glinted here and there off the orichalcum tops of some of the buildings. The king's palace on the center island was completely aglow in the morning light. The orange sunlight reflected off the bright blue water as it moved around the city island, and then down into the slowly flowing river that led west to the sea. Everything stood in contrast to the deep green of the fields to the south and the farmlands to the east. "This is the most beautiful place in the world," Sada said, reaching over and taking Asha's hand and putting her head on her shoulder. Asha allowed the contact for as long as she could, but it started to irritate her. How many times do I have to tell Sada to act like an adult? We're not learners anymore, or plebeies who can do whatever we want in our barracks at night. After a few more moments, she let go of Sada's hand and pointed west to a spot down the wide river. "Sada, do you see that?" Sada squinted. "What is it?" "It looks like a fleet of ships coming up the river." There indeed was a large group of ships all sailing up the river in a formation of sorts. The ships were impressive, with big galleys and tall white sails. They were all painted a dark blue color. "Can you make them out?" Asha was yelling with excitement. "They look blue to me. Sada, do they look blue to you?" "Yes. I don't know what it means." "It's one of the princes. He's come to see the king." Asha knew this was possible. Her father had told her. It was all part of whatever was going on, whatever she was playing a small but essential role in. "Blue. It's one of the diving islands. Can you make out the symbol on the sails?" "It's a shark." "That means it's Prince Azores from the Azores Islands." "Oh, Sada, how exciting! I can't believe we're going to miss all the festivals and celebrations." "Is the prince married yet?" Sada was staring intently at the far-off boats. "Ha!" Asha yelled and slapped Sada on the back. "You going to compete if he isn't?" "I don't know one way or the other." Sada was thinking deeply, then finally said, "I don't think so. Winning the challenges is only half the contest. I don't bring anything to the table, and my family doesn't have any influence." She looked at Asha, her eyes lingering on the purple sash tied around her waist. "But you do, Asha. You could easily compete, and your family line is solid. Not royal, but artificer for the king, the highest of the citizens." "I told you I took the oath," Asha said, irritated again that Sada's one-track mind seemed unable to process what she kept telling her. "Anyway, I must go. The sun is fully up, and today will be a long day. Are you ready?" Sada looked back at the boats coming up the river toward the city. They were more visible now, their hulls glinting here and there with gold. It was a magnificent display. "Can you believe all of that is just for a prince? Can you imagine how the people in one of the diving islands feel when our king visits them? We're used to splendor, and our king travels very well." Asha nodded. She had the same pride as most citizens of the capital city. What they had been able to accomplish was impressive, and they deserved to get some self-esteem from their city and culture. "Sada," Asha said, "I agree, but I have to go. Are you still coming with me?" Sada nodded. "Of course. I've seen the city during festivals, but I may never get the chance again to visit the edges of the kingdom and see all the marvels of the farms." They ran every day for 15 days through some of the most beautiful farmland in existence. The land was flat and easy to traverse, everything a different, rich, vibrant shade of greens and browns. Each farm was a square, 1,000 cubits by 1,000 cubits. Canals and waterways were cut everywhere to irrigate the farms. Some farms also had elaborate waterworks, everything from water-powered mills to wooded platforms that moved the water farther into the farm than simple runoff would have allowed. There were no livestock or animals in captivity. King Atlas had declared that his capital and the surrounding continent, because of their natural resources and farmland richness, would not be beholden to eating anything with a mind or a spirit. This included any animal that walked the land or flew in the air. Any citizen, serf, or slave owned by Atlas and in his kingdom would only eat plants grown through human labor or seafood harvested from the water. "The farmhouses are getting smaller the farther away from the city we get," Sada noticed during one of their morning sprints. Asha had noticed also. "All excess foods are sold at the market on the southern side of the city's outer ring. The farther we get from the city, the farther these farmers are from their market. They have more spoilage, and it takes longer, so they make slightly less income. It's not noticeable house to house, but it is day to day, isn't it? Sada nodded that it was. I also didn't realize how many people it took to run each of these farms. Each farm has to send tribute to the king, Asha said, having been taught how the economy worked in her upbringing by her father. The tribute is money, food, but also 10 able-bodied soldiers and 1 chariot or horse. They were running down a road at the corners of several farms. The one on the left had crews out, all bent over in the field, harvesting what looked like pineapples. Sada pointed to the group. Able-bodied is right. Farm work seems to breed some tight bodies, she said, referencing the appearance of many of the field workers. Spending this much time with Sada was causing wave after wave of frustration for Asha. Still, she had also noticed the field hands herself, so she wasn't as upset as she usually would have been. I noticed, she answered, but I fear the farther we get away from the city, the more arrogant the people are becoming. What makes you think that? Haven't you noticed that more and more people are not wearing clothes when they work, and more turn to greet us, showing off their fitness? Of course I noticed. My trek back will take much longer than our trek out. I can promise you that. Sada might have blushed, but it was hard to tell given the physical exertion of running. But I don't think they are arrogant, Asha. I think they have less and don't have enough money to ruin clothes working in the fields. The thought had not occurred to Asha, but it made more sense to her. A twinge of confusion and sadness caught her. I don't think the king would allow his subjects to suffer, Asha said, but she heard the hollowness of it as she studied the farms and people around her compared to what they had seen closer to the city. Another group of field workers stopped and waved at them as they ran by. Asha, out of modesty, had not been staring hard at the people until now, but for this group, she did and noticed that what Sada said was probably true. The workers were not fit as much as they looked slightly unfed. There was a line between physically fit and physically undernourished, and these people had crossed it. Sada, you're right. I take it back. These people are hungry. They work to produce food all their lives, yet they don't have enough for themselves. She studied the field and crops of the farms. There is no problem here. Their crops are bountiful, she observed. We shouldn't haggle price anymore, Sada said. We should pay the full fee when we stop for food today, and every day hereafter. Asha nodded that she agreed, and felt sadness rise in her chest. The farther they ran, the quicker the farms changed from near high-end estates to modest homes, and now to shacks and more primitive structures. Later that afternoon, as the sun was nearing the horizon and the two were walking to cool down from their run before canvassing for a place to stay for the night, Sada asked the question that Asha knew would be coming at some point on their trip together. Can you tell me what is on the scroll? Do you know? Sada asked a little sheepishly. Clearly, she had wanted to ask for days. She had either finally run out of patience for Asha to bring it up naturally, or she had finally gathered the courage to ask because Asha had not brought it up. I know what is on it, yes. As a matter of fact, I worked for 3 moons before we left to memorize what is on it. Like the old histories? You can recite the scroll without looking at it? Sada seemed impressed. Yes, Asha confirmed. Then why bother to risk so much and commit the information to writing in the first place? What's on it? I can't tell you. Sada was frustrated. No, I don't mean to give away the secrets. Just tell me generally. Like, is it recipes for food? Instructions for growing crops at high elevation? A list of province laws? All the lands the king had conquered? Asha looked at Sada for a while. The younger woman's eyes were big, and her face had a pleading look to it. I can alleviate some of her curiosity without giving anything away, can't I? My father was tasked to stand in the king's court for 2 moons, to listen to all of the state's business, and to write down the manner in which the king dealt with different situations and visitors. Asha finally landed on an explanation. It was specific enough and vague enough at the same time. Your father stood by the king at court? Sada's eyes had gone from big to huge. Every day? Wow! It was quite the honor, yes. He recorded the structure of things, and many of the stone engravings, our laws, he wrote down as well. and other things that could be used for military purposes. Layouts, the distance from this to that, things we see every day and no longer notice, Asha offered. The answers seemed to satisfy Sada, at least for now. Just as Asha had suggested, they walked the rest of the way through the farms so she would be rested for the lands of the Babaroi. They walked every day for 15 more days. As they neared the end of their journey through the farms, it had become apparent that the edges of the kingdom were not only less prosperous, but also under constant harassment from both predatory animals and Babaroi marauders. When they stopped to rest on what Asha thought would be one of their last nights because they were nearing the end of the farms and the end of the kingdom, they had made their typical negotiation, paying the landowner of the farm for food and shelter. At first, on their journey, they had stayed in opulent houses and were treated as honored guests, the king's seal carrying much weight. Now, on the kingdom's edge and closer to the frontier, they were treated more as a burden, an obligation that had to be fulfilled out of fear of reprisal as much as genuine hospitality. The king's seal still carried weight, but where it had started out as a carrot, it was now very much the stick. Of course, people now were not outright hostile. They were still able to procure food and shelter. Only now, they were put up in a barn or shed instead of being offered a bed in the main house. When they did stay in the main house, the accommodations were only marginally better than sleeping outside or in one of the barns. Tonight, they sat with the family that worked one of the farthest out farms. The inside of the main house was sparse and dimly lit. The house was stuffy, and all the windows were closed and covered by blankets to keep the inside light from being visible. The family also did not start a fire in the fire well, even though it was uncomfortably cold tonight. Dinner was simply some uncooked root vegetables. The only thing that looked more downtrodden than the interior and the meal were the people themselves. They were skinny, unwashed, and looked both exhausted and scared. "That you for your hospitality," Asha said, as was the custom before the humble meal. "We are loyal to the king," the father spoke from the head of the table without looking up. There were two young men, maybe 16 and 14 years respectively. There was a younger girl, maybe 8 years old. The mother sat at the opposite end of the table and kept her eyes down as well. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door that made everyone jump. The knock repeated, following the same rhythm as the first time. The mother looked up, her eyes big and a beaten look on her face. "Oh no, not tonight," she said, sounding defeated. The oldest teen jumped up and ran to another room. The father followed closely behind. "I'll go too," the younger boy said. "No," the mother yelled too quickly, then spoke softer. "No, Akan, your father and brother are obligated. You need to stay here and help us if there is a problem, and longer if your father or brother do not return." The teen boy and the father returned from the back room. They were wearing raggedy, hardened animal hides, farmer's armor. Asha had heard her father call it from time to time. "I trained with the king's guard," Asha said, realizing something dangerous was happening. "I will go with you and lend my aid." The knock on the door rang out a third time, the same pattern again, this time followed by some impatient-sounding yelling. "We're ready," the father yelled to the door. "We have to go." He pushed his son to the door and followed. "I appreciate your offer to help. I will feel better out there if you stay here and promise to protect my family should the need arise." "I cannot make that pledge. I am already under a blood oath to the king. However, I will give you my word that I will stay here and defend this house as though it were my own. But when morning comes, I must go." The father snorted and opened the door. Before he left, he turned and looked Asha in the eye. She could see fear and anger underneath his gaze. "If any of us are still around when morning comes, you could have easily honored both oaths." He turned and left, closing the door behind him. After he left, there was an uncomfortable silence. Asha hadn't realized it, but she had stood up when she spoke earlier. After a few moments, she realized that everyone was watching her, waiting for her to do or say something, only she didn't know what they expected. "What's going on?" she finally asked the mother, unsure what else to do. "The Babaroi light fires and beat their war drums before raids. They also sometimes light fires and beat their war drums without raiding," the mother answered. There are other farms farther out. We have a standing militia that we form to protect the frontier border. Citizens are not allowed to form their own military, Sada said, surprised. It was not an accusation, it was just a statement of fact. That would be true if the king paid us any mind, the younger boy spoke angrily. Aryan, the mother yelled. These are guests, and they bear the king's seal. Do not speak treason to them. I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by my statement, Sada said. It's okay, child, the mother said. Both of you are young. We do what we have to. Asha looked around. I need a weapon if I am to defend this place. In there, where they went, the mother said, gesturing to the back room. We have lost 3 sons. Their war gear is still here. Asha nodded and stepped into the back room. It was too dark for her to see, so she returned and took one of the small candles from the main room with her when she went back in. There were several sets of hard leather armor and several weapons, from long spears with razor-sharp stone blades on the ends to a pair of short stone daggers. She tested each weapon and ended up with the daggers. They would most complement her training and allow her to utilize her speed and precision over the enemy's brute force and strength. She could not get the armor on over the bag under her arm with the scroll in it. Finally, she had no choice but to unstrap the pouch. She looked around. There was a well-made orichalcum lockbox, a small chest near the back of the room. She went over to it. It was unlocked and empty. They used to have so much more. Their poverty is recent. I wonder what has happened that they would lose the king's favor? She shook her questions off. There wasn't time. This orichalcum box will be strong, and the lock will hold. It's a good choice given a bad set of options. Hurriedly, she put the bag with the scroll into the small box, turned the key, and placed the key into an inner pocket. When she stepped back out, the other candles had been put out. Sada was frantically waving at her. She understood, and quickly placed her hand over the flame, then pushed down to extinguish it completely. The drums are getting louder, and we can hear the sounds of combat, Sada whispered loudly. All of a sudden, Asha heard it too. The back room was too well insulated, but here in the main room, the noises more easily made their way through the wooded front door. Woman, Asha said low but with fire, speaking to the mother. Tell me now what is going on quickly. I've already told you. It is not complicated. The king used to have soldiers staged all along the border, but he sends more and more of them every year to the provinces. He is fighting secret wars of conquest in the north. But things are not going well, and we suffer because of it. King Atlas would never do that, Sada yelled. Quiet, child, the mother said. He has done that and more. You speak sacrilege, Sada was growing upset. He takes our strongest children for his army. He takes all of our food, and he takes our beasts of burden. Take. We are left to defend ourselves from the Babaroi with only children and old men. The mother was giving a speech that sounded well rehearsed. How far are we from the frontier? Asha questioned the mother. Not far, a short walk, the mother said. Most of the farms farther out have already been ransacked. A few remain. We would all leave if we could, but there is nowhere for us to go, and everything we have is here. Suddenly, a colossal crash shook the ground. Sounds of hounds barking and people crying out in anguish immediately followed. Then a moment later, there was a defining thump against the door. Like someone had thrown a giant rock from a great height and smashed it into another rock. The door cracked in the middle. The external force was so strong, it moved the frame of the door a few inches into the main room. Get behind me, Asha yelled, stepping forward. She was afraid, but her training had taught her to be able to focus her fear into adrenaline and action. Everyone in the room got up and quickly ran behind Asha, even Sada, who, for the first time in their trip and in this conversation, did not have a slight aura of arrogance about her. She looked terribly frightened, just like everyone else. Asha put her arms out to her side, a short dagger in each hand. She was standing at the ready and was positioned between the door and the family. The crash came again against the door, and it gave way, cracking down the middle and falling into the room with a loud follow-up thump. Standing in the doorway, accentuated by other farms burning behind him, was the most enormous and terrifying man Asha had ever seen. The first thing she noticed was the smell. The man absolutely reeked of a horrific odor. He was hairy and naked, except for a crocodile skull on his head and the skin from the beast's body flowing down his back like a cape. His eyes were a bright white that seemed to almost glow in the darkness. His teeth had been filed down to sharp points, and he held a club in one hand and a second skull in his other hand, positioned up and down his forearm like a shield. "Babaroi," Sada whispered, terrified and amazed, from behind Asha. The Babaroi warrior stepped into the room through the broken doorframe. His eyes remained big. If Asha were to guess, the thing couldn't believe his fortune in finding 3 women and a small boy inside a house that had looked abandoned. The Babaroi quickly became aroused. "We have much more to fear from this monster than a quick death," Asha realized, seeing the change in the man. The Babaroi did something so quickly, it was hard to see the movement. The Babaroi screamed a terrifying war cry, and its arms spread wide, exposing the muscles of its arms and chest. The cry had the desired effect. It sent a chill down Asha's spine, and she felt her resolve giving way. If you allow fear to guide you, you will be dead, or worse in a moment. Stay calm. Think. Use your training. This monster is stronger, but I am faster and wiser. Before the Babaroi could finish its war cry, Asha moved. The monster had been fast, but Asha was faster. She had years of training, even though she had no experience outside controlled competitions and contests. She raised her left arm with the dagger while she gripped it backward, so the razor-sharp rock blade extended down her forearm, facing out. She held the other blade in her right arm forward, a traditional position. The Babaroi saw the move and took an awkward swing with its club. Asha ducked under the blow, stepping forward instead of away, bringing her left arm forward and her right arm down low. As the Babaroi's powerful swing sailed over her head, she swung the blade in her right hand up, catching the Babaroi low to the side of his groin. She almost missed, the low-quality hardened leather armor restricting the movement of her arms. She had to readjust her attack at the last moment, as much fighting the armor as the Babaroi monster. But it worked and was a brilliant and brutal move, instantly taking the fight out of the thing. Blood splashed to the side from his lower portion. Asha ran the blade across his exposed areas and into the leg's femoral artery on the opposite side of the strike point. The monster made a whimpering sound and fell. It had bled out on the way down in just a few seconds, a wave of blood dropping out of the beast and onto the floor. Nothing happened for a few moments. Asha could hear her heart pounding in her chest. Then she realized she wasn't breathing, so she forced a breath that caused sound and motion to start flowing again. She looked down at the fallen, bloody Babaroi, and without knowing how or why, she had allowed her base instincts to take over. She realized she was in the middle of a primal scream, her head rising to accentuate the noise. Am I mimicking the Babaroi? I must maintain control of myself. She silenced her yell and wiped some of the blood off her face that was starting to drip down into her eyes. She looked out the door and saw only the fires, no other Babaroi. Then she turned to ensure Sada and the small family whose house it was were okay. When she turned, she was met with a look so fearful she at first thought maybe more Babaroi were approaching, so she turned and checked outside the door again behind her. But there were no more in sight. When she turned a second time, she realized the looks of shock and primal fear were meant for her. Sada just had her mouth open. The rest of the family was starting to back up and cower from her. For some reason, this made Asha angry. I just saved these people, and now they fear me? I carry the king's seal, and I have taken the king's oath, she said to Sada, wiping more blood from her face, ignoring the others in the room to whom she had little loyalty. There must have been something in how she looked or what she said, because even Sada started to slowly back away. She took a few steps backward until she was pressed up against one of the covered windows. You moved like the ancients in the stories, Sada said softly, amazed and terrified. Sada, pull yourself together. From the looks of the outside, there are many more Babaroi. We have to. But before she could finish, there was a collapsing noise, and the blanket covering the window fell away. A Babaroi had pulled it down, and using the same speed she had seen the first one use, this second one reached in and pulled Sada out the window. Asha rushed forward, but she could see nothing outside the window when she looked out it. It was impossible. There was nowhere to hide and nothing obstructing her view. But Sada and the Babaroi were both simply gone in an instant. Asha started to climb out the low window, then realized it meant she would be leaving the scroll and her mission so she could rescue Sada. I took the oath, but I must save my friend, she conceded to herself as she turned to the mother. Woman, I have the key to your lockbox. In it is the king's business. Protect it with your life. I will return for it. If I find it, or you missing, I will spend the rest of my days making you suffer. You will feel my full wrath. Do you understand? The urine stream hitting the floor from under the woman's dress and the look of fear on her face made it clear that she understood well enough. When Asha got outside the window, she studied the ground. There were tracks going everywhere, but the fresh footprints of the Babaroi were clear. It looked like there had been 3 of them, and the trail led forward into the frontier, further away from the farms and into the mountains. Asha followed the footprints with her eyes. Her view came to rest on low hills off in the distance, the first change in geography since they had left the city almost 30 days ago. There was a lightning storm on the other side of the hills. Asha twisted her head and neck, lifting her nose into the air. She smelled the Babaroi and the storm, the smell that came before rain, mixed with the putrid stink of the monsters. She bent down to one knee, placing both daggers in the soft dirt, and placed her hands on the ground. She could feel the family moving around in their squalid house behind her, and the Babaroi running away in front of her, going back to their hilly dwellings. She picked up the heavier steps of one of them, the one carrying Sada, no doubt. This armor is terrible. It's already starting to rub my skin in places, and it slows me down and restricts my movements. It is also heavy. I will fatigue sooner as I give chase. Acting quickly, Asha untied the leather and unceremoniously dropped it to the ground. She thought for a second longer, eyeing the storm and rain. It was a very cool night, and it would be colder in the mountains. Wet clothes would only make her trek worse, and once wet would make her even colder. She pulled the rest of her clothes off. When she did, she felt the key to the small, locked chest in her shirt pocket. She stared at it for a moment longer, trying to decide how to carry it with her. Then, without ceremony, she put the key in her mouth and swallowed it. If I make it back, I just added a day to my stay, she joked to herself, pushing away the thought of what she would have to do to recover the key later. Instead, she picked up the 2 daggers and took off, running at her full speed in the direction of the coming storm. Asha had run for several hours. Her father had been right. The Babaroi were fast runners, faster than she ever would have thought possible. The 3 she was chasing were outpacing her even while one of them carried Sada while it ran. The wind had picked up. The frequent sound of thunder rolled down from the hills and across the flat land. The storm seemed almost stationary, like it respected the kingdom's border more than the Babaroi did. Asha felt good. She was rested and ready to exercise. The running had her endorphins high. She approached the base of the foothills. The Babaroi trail led right into a winding pass between 2 of the more prominent hills. Asha was no fool. It was also the perfect place for an ambush if they had detected their pursuer. Asha rationalized, if I can smell them, they can certainly smell me. How far behind am I? I would say an hour, maybe more. Lightning flashed and illuminated everything for a few moments. Then almost instantly, thunder boomed so loud the ground shook. Poseidon is trying to warn me of the same thing. Asha changed her approach angle. She started moving more to her left as she ran so that she would be well away from the trail when she reached the foothills. The lightning also answered another question for her. When it flashed, she saw that the hills were very sparsely wooded. There would be no approach from concealment. The wind picked up again, and more lightning struck. It was all nearby, and Asha suddenly felt very exposed on the plain. She sped up her run as the thunder rolled over her. The pace of the lightning and thunder was reaching almost a frenzy. As soon as she was close to some of the larger rocks of the foothills, she stopped, crouched down, and leaned into one of the big stones with her head low so as not to attract the storm's wrath. She rested there in her crouched position for a very long time. If I'm pinned down here, then they certainly are pinned down higher up the slope and closer to the storm. This is my chance to catch up. She forced herself to leave her position's moderate safety and start climbing up the rocky side of the hill. It was pouring rain, and the lightning violently flashed all around her. One bolt struck close enough to move stone a few 100 feet away. She could feel the electricity surge through the ground at her feet immediately after the strike. Finally, she reached the hill's crest and could look down into the ravine that she would have been coming up. The lightning flashed several times, but she did not see any Bobberoy waiting in ambush. Doesn't mean anything. They could have been here and left because I was so far behind or because of the storm. Caution was the right approach. As soon as she relaxed the smallest amount, she heard rocks moving above her on the ridge. She looked up and suddenly saw the massive silhouette of a Bobberoy in mid-swing with its club. Lightning flashed in the sky behind it. She saw her attacker just in time to avoid a fatal blow, but not in time to dodge the swing completely. The club came down hard and caught her under her left arm, which she had instinctively raised to block the attack, while simultaneously pushing her head out of the way, avoiding being knocked unconscious or killed instantly. The blow knocked the wind from her and forced her off balance. She felt the crack of several ribs, the pain shooting up her side and into her shoulder as she slid down the rock face on her back. She could feel her skin being torn from the sharp rocks on the ground, but it was a lucky chain of events. Otherwise, the big Bobberoy could have taken an easy second swing and finished his work. Asha tried to stop her slide and catch her breath. She could feel her body flooding with adrenaline, which helped her focus and get control of her breathing. As she slowed, she twisted herself and got to her feet. The giant enemy warrior was hastily moving down the rocks toward her. She put both daggers in her left hand and picked up a fist-sized stone. Without waiting, she threw the stone at the Bobberoy hard. It impacted him in the face, and he stumbled. She reached down and found another stone, then another, then another. After 4 throws and 4 solid impacts to its head, the Bobberoy went down. Asha composed herself and scrambled up the rocks to get to the monster. Its eyes were rolling around, and it was uttering some noises that sounded like curses directed at her. "Best damn thrower in the city." Asha pounded out, using each word as a yell as she bashed the downed man's head to a pulp with a large stone. Lightning struck in rhythm with each bash of the rock all around her, and the thunder roared. When she was done, she stood for a long time over the mangled corpse and watched as the rain cleared away the gunk that had been the thing's head. The wind had the rain blowing near sideways. After a longer time, the storm had cleared so much of the gunk away that it was hard for Asha to remember what had just happened. The rain and wind continued, but much of the lightning and thunder had stopped. Asha had made her way up the trail. It was difficult, given the damage to the ribs on her left side. Every movement hurt, and she was forced to keep her left elbow tucked into her side to minimize the pain. This made climbing and keeping her balance on the rocks much more difficult. There was a cave near the top of the hill before the trail turned north, and its elevation increased. There was firelight coming from inside the cave. Asha could also hear voices using the language of the Bobberoy, short, loud statements that she did not understand. She also heard what sounded like a baby crying. "It sounds hungry," she thought. As she got closer, she smelled the fire. It smelled like it had meat cooking in it. Asha was not familiar with what different animals smelled like when cooked. Still, she knew of the practice and could put the pieces together. The smell was smoky and pleasant. She was surprised it didn't smell worse, given the laws that existed that forbade the cooking and eating of animals. The king says the practice of eating other animals goes against the will of the gods. Sure smells good, though. Stay focused. There are more of the monsters about, and this is most probably their lair. They have Sada, and it will be a fight to free her. As she got close, she found an angle near the cave opening where she could stay hidden to the side and peek her head around to see into the opening. White smoke exited the top of the cave, dissipating into the rain and darkness. The firelight was low, and it caused many shadows, making it hard at first to make out the interior. Asha stayed in her hiding place until her eyes adjusted. The talking was between 2 Bobberoy, a man and a woman. Just as Asha had thought from the cries, there was a very small baby in a bed made from animal hides. The bed was a few feet from the fire, close enough for warmth without being too close. The fire was large and low, a mix of flame and ember. It had 2 wood poles on either side, and a large log between the poles going across the fire proper. There was something tied to the log over the flames. Asha knew she recognized it, but her brain wouldn't let her make the connection. It was frustrating. Finally, the fire flared, and an ember cracked, adding just enough light to illuminate the thing on the log fully. Sada was being cooked over the fire. Asha had seen her friend's face, and it was twisted in pain. Sada was dead, there was no doubt, but it looked for all the world like she had not been dead when she was first placed over the fire. Asha had seen Sada's wrists and feet had marks where she had struggled, and that look on her face showed as much pain as any person could possibly suffer. It was as if Asha had been kicked in the stomach. She felt every negative emotion she had ever known, only amplified by 1,000 times. Rage filled her. A fit of blinding anger swelled in her belly from such a deep primal source that it instantly consumed her. Before she knew what she was doing, she had stepped into the light and stood in the center of the cave opening, screaming a war cry, her arms outstretched with a blade in each. She could feel the pain on her left side, but her body was flooded with every endorphin and every ounce of adrenaline it could produce. The baby started to cry at the noise. Of the 2 Barbaroi, the woman ran to the baby and picked it up, clutching it to her chest to protect it. The man yelled, returning Asha's war cry with a terrifying one of his own. He was weaponless, though. Asha realized his club and bone shield were leaning behind her in the cave opening. When she saw this, she smiled an evil smile at the man and ran her 2 stone daggers together, producing a white spark from the friction of the sharp blades. The woman holding the baby was yelling something, having recovered enough and losing some of her fear. Apparently, the Barbaroi did not consider a naked woman from the city much of a threat. Whatever the female Barbaroi was yelling, she convinced the man of something, and he launched a ferocious charge. That same first-step quickness that Asha had now seen a couple times from different Barbaroi. But she was ready for it, nothing if not adaptive and able to learn on the fly. The man ran at her with his arms outstretched, attacking to grab her. I do not stand a chance if he can get his hands on me. But Asha was elevated. She was fighting to avenge her good friend. She saw things as if they were moving slowly, even though she knew they were not. She watched the man charge. She had plenty of time to gauge his steps' rhythm and his arms' motion. He was simply running in a straight line to tackle her. She shifted her weight to her back foot and lowered the dagger in her right hand, not trusting her left to be powerful enough with her injury. Almost luxuriously, she pivoted just the smallest amount to step out of his charge, lowering the dagger and letting the man's momentum do all the work. The blade sunk into his abdomen and cut down as he advanced. His stomach opened and his bowels fell out. Asha watched him go to the ground. He was thrashing about, half trying to stand, half trying to push his guts back into the gaping wound. He didn't last long, and his thrashing slowed until his eyes went lifeless. The Barbaroi woman started screaming bloody murder, still clutching her infant. Asha watched her. She had the briefest thought of letting the woman and the baby leave, but then her eyes rested back on the burned body of Sada, tied over a fire and cooked, a scream of pain and fear frozen on her now dead face. The rage returned. The baby continued to cry. The woman continued to shriek what could only be threats. The shadows from the fire danced. Asha heard herself reissue the war cry and realized she was stepping toward the woman with both blades raised and her grip tight. The sun was rising to her back. It was an ominous sunrise with a blood-red sky and deep orange clouds. The sun's rays were easily visible in the early morning fog, which was low to the ground, and would burn away when the sunlight reached it. Asha sat on a ridge a good way from the Barbaroi cave, off anything that resembled a trail. She sat facing the farms, which were easy to see from her high vantage point. There were smoke plumes far into the farms. Apparently, last night had been a full Barbaroi assault. Asha had somehow circumvented their main group. She could see way in the distance the hordes of Barbaroi still moving between farmhouses. Poseidon, I cannot return to the house where I placed the king's scroll. It's too far over open ground, and the whole place is littered with Babaroi and death. Her ribs and torso hurt when she spoke. It hurt when she took a breath. My back must be a bloody mess, given the amount of bleeding it is doing. She could feel the sunlight on her back, which made it hurt and itch. I'm sorry, Sada, she said. Somehow, I was not prepared for this. I took one step outside our kingdom, and in that one step, I lost everything. I lost the sash that identified me as on errand from the king. I lost the king's scroll, the most prized possession I will ever hold. And I lost you, my good friend. Asha felt like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. She would have welcomed it, but her body seemed to be in shock. She felt sadness with no way to resolve her feelings. She sat longer and watched the sky brighten. As the morning light changed from red to orange to finally white daylight, Asha could see more and more of the destruction to the farms from the Babaroi. Despite the carnage, as the day brightened, so did her resolve. Sada, I swear to you. I swear I will reach Kemet, Egypt, as they call their home. I will make it to the priests there and deliver the message. I have it memorized. I am the king's business now, not some animal hide wrapped into a scroll. The priests will know the workings of our government. They will receive the measurements of the city and the methods we use to farm and to prosper. She coughed from the pain in her chest as she stood up. I do not know why this is important, but I took the oath. She turned to face the sun. Its light was warm, reminding her that she was cold. And I pity the next person who attempts to stand between me and my blood oath. I swear it to you, Sada, my friend. Moreover, I know your thoughts. Your death will have meaning, and I will capture that meaning for you, or die trying, taking with me all who stand in our way. With the resolution fresh on her lips, she took a step in the direction of Kemet, away from her home of Atlantis. She stumbled and went down to one knee, her body racked with pain. She cursed and forced herself to stand again. Then she took another step, wrapping her right arm around her left side to try and manage the pain. She coughed and spat out blood. Then she took another step, then another. She would honor the oath and ultimately complete her journey at greater cost and further sacrifice. Part 2. The Babaroi. Asha hobbled and limped as fast as she could. The rain and lightning were her only companions, harsh allies, but allies nonetheless. She was exhausted. Her breathing was forced. Sharp rocks cut her feet badly as she tried to run. The hillsides were unwelcoming. Her ribs were broken. She carried dark bruises and deep cuts all over her muscular form that still seeped red blood onto her equally red skin. The landscape was bleak. The Babaroi ruled here. They held little regard for the land or its conquered peoples. I need to find clothes and shelter, and a better weapon than this silly rock raced through her thoughts. Asha was bloodied from the fight back in the cave. She tried to free her friend from the evil Babaroi cannibals, but failed, arriving too late. The giant male had tried to rape her, already aroused at her approach, his woman egging him on as she protected her tiny newborn while throwing anything she could find to aid her mate and screaming taunts and threats. Asha had been forced to kill all three out of pure rage. They had her companion Sada cooking over a fire with a spit stake running through her. It was a horrifying image she still had not processed. The types and levels of evil she encountered out here in the lands of the Babaroi were utterly foreign to her. She shivered. The rain was cold. It would have been tolerable with her clothes from when she had started her journey from the king's palace. She had been a fool and didn't understand the world outside her protected upbringing. This cruel place had literally already taken everything from her. She had no possessions but her rock. Everything else had been stripped away, including her friend Sada. Lightning flashed. She heard gravel sliding and talking from behind her. Her pursuers were gaining on her and were brazen. They had no concern for stealth or fear of discovery. These were the Babaroi Storm Reapers, not the unclothed monsters she had been fighting, but special elite troops. Clad in dark, weather-worn armor that seemed to have witnessed countless battles, the Babaroi Storm Reapers loomed in front of her like malevolent shadows. Their towering figures cast eerie silhouettes against the jagged rocks, and the thunderous booms of the storm were drowned out by the deafening pounding of her own heart. Their faces were obscured by ominous helmets adorned with wickedly sharp, horn-like protrusions that sent a shiver down her spine. Through the narrow slits of their helmets, their eyes glinted with chilling intensity, reflecting a predatory cunning that made her blood run cold. The typical Babaroi soldier fought without armor or even clothes. They were brutal, hairy savages. These Storm Reapers were different, elite compared to the typical warriors. The Reapers were even more of a force to be reckoned with. In the ranks of the Babaroi army, they stood above the rest, distinguished by their unmatched skill, unwavering loyalty, and a taste for cruelty that sent fear rippling through even their fellow soldiers. Asha slipped and slid a few feet down the rocky slope. Her shin caught on a rock, cutting her leg deeply as she slid. She caught herself before she cried out in pain. She didn't enjoy the same brazenness as the others. She needed every advantage, even though there were none. "Climb faster, Ekporcent, even the hill rejects your feeble strides," was yelled from the men behind her. The expletive was a reference to how they would violate her when they caught her. She couldn't let that happen, not just for herself, but because she had taken the oath from the king himself. Her body belonged to the people of Atlantis. She could not allow it to be violated at any cost. Thunder boomed right after their yell, reverberating through the hills like the drums the Babaroi used to honor their dark, twisted gods. Don't fall for it. Don't yell back. They're trying to bait you into giving away your position. Even if they heard the rock slide in this storm, they need a second noise now that they are listening for a meaningful direction to me. Instead of responding, she hurried her pace. Everything ached when she moved. Just a few weeks ago, she would have stayed home in bed for a week to recover. Those days were over. They would only ever return if she completed her mission. Get the knowledge she possessed to Kemet in the Dark Lands and hope they decide to provide aid to her king. Asha looked up at the hill just as lightning illuminated the sky. The terrain was all the same, an endless sea of sharp rocks. The sky lit up again. She saw her salvation. Near the top of the rise was a large boulder as tall as her. She turned and waited, ready. Lightning struck and thunder boomed almost instantly. It was a close strike. It illuminated everything again. She caught a glimpse of her pursuers. They were farther down the rise, taking the same path she did, tracking her using the blood she was leaving on the stones, still visible even in the rain. They were moving quickly, equal distance down the hill as the large boulder was up it. You were always the best runner and the best jumper in school. This is the most important race of your life. Asha dug deep and moved quickly. She could feel her body protest. It was both physically beaten and drained of energy. She bent over and used her hand and arms as well as her feet and legs. Lighting flashed again. She was making good time. The top of the rise was close. She shifted her line for the last 100 feet to approach the ridge right in the boulder's path should it be rolled down from its perch. The view on the other side was startling when she rounded the crest. It was a town of sorts. There were lights and fires spread out in a grid pattern. It wasn't nearly as impressive as her home city of Atlantis, but it was no small settlement. Her relief was short-lived when the voices of the Babaroi behind her were carried up on the wind. She snapped her head around. Lightning flashed again. They saw her silhouetted against the dark, turbulent night sky. "We're going to send you in the and then rip your heart out of your face," they yelled. Asha was well past any level of new fear they could inflict on her. The events of the past several days were as horrific as this world could provide. Instead, she found herself angry again. She was angry at herself for not heeding her father's warnings, and angry at the Babaroi for existing. She scurried around to the back of the giant rock and waited, watching. Blood ran down her, the rain accelerating it. The rocks and pebbles under her feet started to stain with the volume of it. These idiots are still following my exact path up. She watched and waited. It was going to work. Her nerves were frayed. She was fighting every instinct she had to keep running, fight or flight. Her heart pounded in her chest. She watched with squinting eyes as the Babaroi Storm Reapers drew near. The raging thunderstorm provided an ominous backdrop, adding to the sense of dread that enveloped her as they ascended the rocky slope with relentless determination. Each step they took seemed to shake the very ground beneath her, a haunting reminder of their ruthlessness and brutal power. Digging deep into her reserves, Asha steadied herself as the storm reapers drew near, their looming forms still casting ominous shadows in the flickering light of the storm. She was brave, but she still wanted to run. She was no match in single combat against a reaper, much less three of them. As their malevolent grins widened, confident of her imminent demise, she pushed her bloody shoulder into the boulder. It didn't move. Cold fear replaced her bravery. She tried again. Nothing. The stone felt heavier than anything she could have imagined. The Babaroi reapers were within a few dozen feet. It was too late to run away. With a thunderous roar that came from so deep inside her soul, it felt unnatural. The giant boulder moved. She turned and used her legs and back, screaming and pushing with everything she had. The rock tilted, then she felt the weight of it as it started to rock back on her. "No!" She screamed in a primal fit. She pushed again, her feet, already bloody and torn, pushing against the rocks on the rise so hard they pierced the skin of her feet, only stopping when they met bone. The boulder shifted again. It broke loose and hurtled down the rocky incline, gathering unstoppable momentum. The reapers' taunts were instantly drowned out by the deafening crash of stone against stone. The trap was sprung. Asha's eyes blazed with fierce determination as she fell to the ground. Her screams turned from rage to pain as her brain started to process the effort her body had just undertaken. She turned her head to watch the boulder's descent. The impact was devastating. It collided with the storm reapers, who had little time to react. The cascading torrent of stones swallowed their evil forms, their armor no match for the overwhelming force unleashed upon them. The ground shook beneath the weight of their demise, and the storm's fury reflected the shock of their defeat. Thunder boomed. Lightning struck as though the universe was throwing a temper tantrum at the outcome. Asha was crumped on the ground. She began to weep, the pain becoming despair, a deep, passionate cry that consumed every part of her. The old woman. The water was warm now, not cold. She felt she was being moved about. Hands were on her, sometimes going places they shouldn't. Panic filled her. She forced herself to climb from the dark depth into the light. Asha forced open her eyes, immediately trying to fight off whoever was groping her. "No," she yelled as she tried to focus. "Relax, young one," an old, kind woman's voice said in her ear. Asha flailed her arms, splashing water everywhere. Warm water that smelled like clean soap. Cracks between the roof and walls lit the room. It was daytime. The room was small. It seemed pleasant and clean. She realized she was in a large tub, a bath. There were a couple of old women standing over her. They had been washing the gunk and grim off of her. She put her hand to her head as it felt strange. Her hair was gone. It was knotted and lice-ridden, the same old woman said. Her voice was world-weary but inviting. The Babaroi. It was the storm reapers. Asha had a flood of memories rush back that panicked her. The old woman put her hand on Asha's chest over her heart to calm her. It was a sympathetic move, although touching her shoulder instead of her bare chest would have worked just as well. "You are in Oricor," she said as though that should be soothing, then noticed the blank look on Asha's face. "We mine the orichalcum," the woman added, as though it should help Asha understand. Her hand lingered too long. Asha shifted to remove it. Orichalcum was incredibly valuable. They had many refineries outside the capital city. Orichalcum was a huge reason Atlantis had prospered for so long. But these lands have fallen to the Babaroi, Asha protested once she processed the information. The old woman looked to her companion and made a motion. The other old women nodded and left the room. Once they were gone, the old woman spoke. "In the merciless hierarchy of the Babaroi's rule, it is the common people who bear the brunt," she started, her voice steady and somber. "Each day we struggle to survive, every aspect of our lives regulated, from the harsh forced labor to the meager resources we are allowed." She waved her hand to suggest the room represented meager resources. Then she paused, her gaze falling on a small piece of orichalcum that lay on a bench across the room. Asha followed her gaze. Then she continued. "And yet, within the confines of this oppression, our town of Oricor holds a unique position." The old woman's tone was thoughtful. We are miners, my young friend, toiling deep within the earth to extract orichalcum, a mineral more valuable than gold and essential to the might of the Barbarois Empire. Despite the cruelty of our rulers, our town's survival has been grudgingly allowed because of the precious resource that we provide. What do you know of the Barbaroi? Asha asked. Her father had told her many stories, but she had dismissed them. She was naive and mistakenly doubted her father at the time. The old woman turned to a wooden dresser. It took her some effort to pull her eyes away from Asha's form. She picked up a comfortable-looking thick blanket. She held it up, suggesting Asha exit the tub. Asha briefly hesitated. She felt exposed, and the old woman did not drop her eyes or offer Asha any modesty. Seeing no other option, she stood and stepped out of the water. The old woman studied her, her eyes not entirely innocent as they looked Asha up and down. Asha took the blanket and felt a sense of relief when she was covered. The old woman pointed to a table and stool. Asha walked over and sat down. The old woman turned to a pot with some kind of stew in it. Higher up, there are the regional overlords, she began a rehearsed speech, appointed by the high regents themselves. Each one is responsible for a conquered city-state. They are the local face of the Barbarois' rule, keeping order and exacting tributes from the weary populace. Here in Oricor, far to the west of the citadel, an overlord enforces their will. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing, focusing on the food. And then, the Council of Shadows stands beside the High Regent. Comprised of high-ranking officials, each holds responsibility for significant aspects of the kingdom's functioning. They are known for their ruthlessness. The old woman's voice held a note of sorrow as she looked up and remembered Asha had covered herself. Beyond the relative safety of Oricor lies a vast, desolate expanse, she said. Its landscapes bear the scars of once vibrant city-states and bustling marketplaces, now left in ruins by the Barbarois' iron fist. The very air is laden with a lingering sense of dread, a chilling testament to their relentless reign, her words heavy with the echo of loss. In the heart of this stark wasteland stands the citadel, a fortress as ominous as it is grand. It is a grotesque monument to the Barbarois' triumphs, built from the remnants of vanquished territories. Its labyrinthine structure, with its towering spires and deep dungeons, is designed to evoke fear and ensure obedience. She stoked the fire under the pot. The flames danced in the reflection of her eyes. The Barbaroi themselves are embodiments of their kingdom's harshness. Their rule is absolute, unforgiving, crushing any spark of dissent or rebellion. They exploit the people, forcing them to live in perpetual fear and destitution while reveling in their conquest spoils. Her eyes seemed to glaze over as she delved into an even darker reality. Their malevolence extends even to clash, where they manipulate outcomes to favor their chosen teams, indifferent to the costs inflicted upon the players. Their insidious influence seeps into every facet of life under their rule. "What's clash?" Asha asked. The old woman glanced toward Asha, her expression softening slightly at the question. "Ah, clash, my dear," she began, her voice echoing a mix of fear, respect, and a tinge of sadness. Clash is a grand, cruel game staged by the Barbaroi for their twisted amusement and control. It's a spectacle of power, strategy, and survival, where teams, each representing an individual city-state or area of the city, battle against each other. The stakes are high, and the challenge is brutal. For some, it's a desperate attempt at survival. For others, a chance to rise in favor or regain lost prestige. The old woman leaned back, looking into the fire. "It's more than a game, my young pretty friend. It reflects our lives under the Barbaroi, shows their dominance, and is a testament to our struggles. Amidst this oppression and despair, there is resistance. Figures like Dragon and his team are a pocket of defiance, brave souls challenging the Barbaroi's reign, game by game." Asha pondered. "I don't understand. We had teams and leagues and sports in the city, back in Atlantis. Is this the same?" "No, child, it is not the same," the old woman replied, a note of regret lacing her words. "Sports in Atlantis were a source of joy, a testament to skill and friendly competition. In the truest sense, they were games meant to uplift spirits, bring people together, and celebrate prowess and camaraderie." Her gaze hardened as she continued. "Clash is no such thing. It's a perversion of the concept of sport, a mockery of the fairness and unity that games are supposed to represent. In Atlantis, teams competed for glory, for the joy of the game. In Clash, they fight for survival. It's a malicious display of the Babaroy's dominance, where the players' lives are mere playthings in the hands of the oppressors. She sighed heavily, her eyes reflecting the somber flames. It's a tool of control, a blood sport where the stakes are as real as the fear they instill. It's the furthest thing from the sports and leagues you knew in Atlantis. You mentioned someone named Dragon? Dragon is a seasoned player in Clash. The old woman spoke of the man with a mix of respect and caution. His experiences in the arena have made him a shrewd leader and strategist. He's driven by a desire to erase the stain on his honor and regain his lost prestige from the time he challenged Talon. Dragon holds a soft spot for the underdogs despite his hard exterior, offering support and protection when he can. The old woman turned her gaze back to Asha, the firelight casting long shadows across her lined face. Here in Oricor, the local overlord is Talon, a man as cunning as he is savage. He leads Team Ironclaw, feared players from our rubble-filled city-state. Their brutal, ruthless tactics and uncanny ability to exploit their opponent's weaknesses are infamous in Clash. Talon thrives on his opponent's fear, using it to manipulate and dominate the game. His rivalry with Dragon is bitter, as I mentioned. What is this game? Asha was interested. The ideas were very foreign to her. Clash? Of course, child, the old woman murmured, adjusting her phrasing to accommodate the new term for Asha. Her voice filled the room, resonant and almost hypnotic in its cadence. Clash is a test of resolve and bravery, composed of 2 teams, each with 5 members. The game plays out in an arena divided into 2 territories, each team safeguarding their side with an altar where their skull resides. Her hands drew an invisible line through the air, bisecting the imagined field of play. This skull, it's not just a bone, my pretty friend. It symbolizes life, survival, and the spirit of the people it represents. The aim is to capture the enemy's skull and return it to your altar, while at the same time preventing the rival team from doing the same with your skull. Success means victory, a triumph over death itself. She paused, gathering her thoughts before moving on. There are 2 leagues in Clash, the Underleague, which is composed of local teams, each representing their own district in the city-state, and the Overleague, the elite. These Overleague teams are the best of the best, chosen from each city-state champions, traveling from one arena to another, embodying the hopes and fears of their people. Her gaze focused back on Asha, a fire in her eyes. This game, it's not just about physical strength or strategic mastery. It's a testament to courage, determination, the will to survive against impossible odds. It's a holy sacrament of our survival, a sacred ritual of resistance. That, my dear, is Clash. Dragon is in a different league? I don't understand. Ah, Dragon and his team, she began, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and sorrow. They are the best we have here in the Underleague. Dragon, once a celebrated player of the Overleague from the grand city of Themis, now leads a team of skilled and resilient individuals. But while he is the best of the Underleague, he has never beaten Talon to advance to the Overleague. On Dragon's team is Lycos, raised among the wilds in the untamed Canis expanse. He is swift and shrewd, she described, her fingers mimicking a swift motion in the air. Yet he often holds back, his speed not matching his potential aggressiveness. It's his weakness, but no one else in this city-state can match him in his role. Then there is Telamon, a gentle giant from Agora Haven, she said, her hands indicating a large stature. His strength is remarkable, and he serves as the team's backbone, both in the game and off the field. Alcine, the resilient woman from the mines, adds a unique strength to the team, her spirit never wavering even in the face of grave injuries. And the youngest, Pyros, she smiled at Asha, he is a beacon of hope, full of energy and innovation. Saved by Dragon from the ruins of the Zephyrium market, he has grown into a formidable player in his own right. They are unmatched in our local league, the old woman sighed. Yet, when compared to the elites in the Overleague, they fall short. It is not a matter of skill, but the ruthless environment they face. Their individual strengths cannot fully compensate for the experienced, well-equipped teams they confront. And yet they persist, showing us all what it means to resist, strive, and survive. Her gaze met Asha's again, a fire burning in her eyes. Remember this, Clash is a mirror to our lives. It reflects our struggle, our defiance, and our will to endure. And in that mirror, Dragon and his team shine brightly, their spirit undying. What do they do in the game? How is it played? Of course, dear, the old woman nodded, shifting her gaze to the fire crackling in the hearth. Her voice took on a storytelling cadence, the words rolling off her tongue like a well-woven tapestry. In this intricate dance of Clash, each player has a part to perform, a unique role that molds their destiny on the field. Take Lycos, for instance, the one we refer to as the thief. He has a critical task. He must be as quick as a hare, darting across the battleground to seize the opponent's skull and bring it back to their own altar. His role demands speed, agility, and sharp, decisive thinking. Then, there's Telamon, the sturdy rock at the heart of the team. His title is the Shield, and his duty is to guard their altar fiercely, preventing opponents from claiming their skull. His strength and resilience are his greatest assets, and his anticipation must be as sharp as a hawk's. Alcine, the spearhead of the team's offenses, is on the other end of the spectrum. She is the first to engage the enemy. Her task is to unsettle their formation and carve a path for the thief. Her role demands strength, a shrewd mind, and a daring spirit. Pyros, the youngest of them all, serves as the bait. It's a deceptively simple term for a complex role. He must draw the enemy's attention, trick them into erroneous moves, create diversions and openings. His position requires him to be unpredictable, innovative, and fearless. He can assume any role and confuse the enemy at every step. And finally, there's Dragon, the heart and mind of the team, aptly named the Marshal. He is the one who strategizes, orchestrates their moves, and makes the critical decisions that could change the tide of the game. His role demands a calm mind, a keen understanding of the game, and years of experience. Remember, though, the old woman added, leaning forward, these roles are not set in stone. Clash is an unpredictable beast, and the players must adapt, switch roles, and evolve their strategies as the game unfolds. Different teams have different approaches. The old woman drew in a deep breath, her stern gaze back to Asha, studying the young woman's face as she recalibrated her words, letting her eyes linger as they lowered. To triumph in the Overleague, she began anew, anticipating Asha's next question, her voice firm. Dragon's team must do more than simply improve. They require a game changer, a force that the elites would not see coming. Her gaze returned to the crackling hearth, the shadows dancing upon her aged features as she continued. Lycos, as fast and as cunning as he is, isn't aggressive enough. He doesn't possess the merciless edge required to beat the elites. He plays by the rules, even in this twisted game. He respects the spirit of Clash, even when it is clear that those at the top do not. It makes him a good person, but not a great player. She glanced back at Asha, her eyes piercing. What they truly need is a player who can match the ruthlessness of the elites, someone faster and more aggressive than Lycos, someone willing to push boundaries, to skirt the rules, to maim their opponent, if necessary, even outside the brutal confines of the game. The old woman sighed heavily, her gaze softened, and she smiled. This is a harsh reality, my dear. A person like that, a player like that, could change everything for Dragon's team. But such a person is hard to find and even harder to control. The path to victory is laden with thorns. Asha nodded that she understood. The old woman put several spoonfuls of the stew into a wooden bowl and brought it over to Asha. She started to put it on the table in front of her, then pulled it back. I am hungry, Asha said, looking up at the old woman. Not understanding the move, the old woman licked her lips. We're all hungry. Nothing is free out here. Her eyes got bright. She ran her arm across her mouth like she was wiping away drool. Disrobe and let me watch you eat. I promise I won't touch you. It's the only trade I will make for the food. Recovery. The old woman was a pervert, but she kept to herself. Yes, she degraded Asha, but at least it allowed Asha a place to recoup and a person willing to help with the process. Asha had to barter for everything for a while. The trade was always the same. Let the old woman watch her do something. Asha held to the oath. Her body remained pure, as she had promised it would. After 2 moons, her feet were healed enough for her to walk, and her ribs no longer ached. She could take deep breaths and even felt good enough to run. It took forever, but eventually the old woman agreed to make Asha an outfit, and let her leave. It was a mutual agreement, Asha agreeing not to beat the old woman senseless, and the old woman agreeing that was a fair trade. It turned out the old woman was named Alara. Her husband had been killed in clash years ago, but like most people now, she had little else to do than follow the League. She talked about it endlessly over the 2 months she cared for Asha. Apparently, it was expensive to attend a match. They kept the price so high that it took half a year's wages to attend, and just low enough that people could save up and go if they sacrificed everything else. It was a clever system that added yet another layer of manipulation to Talon's warlord's control of the city-state. Asha was the daughter of a tradesman. While not royalty, she was used to nice clothes and a privileged life. Especially after her father received the king's charter to map the city, their family was elevated to being first among the equals of the Atlantean population. Her father had actually stood in the king's court in the end. What an honor. As she looked in the mirror, wearing the clothes that Alara had made for her, she knew she looked like a pauper. It didn't change her feelings about herself at all. Having clothes again, having anything that was hers, however, was a tremendous relief. Alara stood behind her, admiring her work, or more likely imagining how Asha had looked a few minutes ago as she dressed. "Thank you," Asha said, lifting her gaze and looking at Alara's reflection in the mirror. "You are an old pervert witch. You also have been my savior." The old woman smiled. "Thank you for giving me something to do and reminding me what hope looks like," she said very sincerely. Asha was ready to leave, but wanted to do something nice and to serve her own curiosity. "When is the next match?" she asked, still talking to Alara's reflection through the mirror. The old woman shook her head. "In a blink, but it doesn't matter. You could never afford it." A blink was a term that Asha knew meant 3 days. How much would a suit of Storm Reaper armor fetch in the market? Asha asked, hatching a plan. The old woman scoffed. "A year's pay, but it doesn't matter. Where would we get anything to barter with? We could parade you around naked doing tricks with a snake and come nowhere close to being able to afford Reaper armor." Asha made a sour face to remind the old woman that she was no longer too weak to protest or be forced to demean herself again. "You know what I mean," the old woman said with dismissive irritation. "Don't ruin this," Asha said. "I want to do something nice for you and see one of these matches while I am here." Asha climbed the ridge. It was much easier in the daylight, with good shoes, and no one pursuing her trying to murder her. The hill and ridge line were an hour's journey west from the town of Orekor. Asha realized she was lucky she collapsed on the side of it she did. Otherwise, the townspeople would never have seen her. She was, of course, counting on that now, hoping that no one proceeded to the other side and discovered the 3 reapers who had been pursuing her that were crushed by the boulder. As Asha stood on the rise, looking back at the town of Orekor, a sense of duty weighed heavily on her heart. Her mission to deliver crucial knowledge to Kemet was necessary, but the suffering of the people here demanded her immediate attention. The Babaroi oppressed them, and she couldn't turn her back on their plight. Her eyes scanned the town below. The first sight that greeted her was the marketplace. Though subdued, it showed the determination to survive under tyranny. Merchants displayed their wares. Asha sensed their mannerisms' wariness. The marketplace was depressed, yet it clung to life as a testament to the people's resilience. As her gaze shifted, she saw the towering walls of the arena of clash. A grim reminder of the cruelty they endured filled her with a deep sense of sorrow and anger. Asha felt compelled to fight for their freedom and ignite hope within them again. "I was always the best athlete in school. I know that world isn't comparable to this one. I see the brutality out here, but in a game, a sport with rules, even bad ones, I have the skills and have learned the determination and ruthlessness necessary for victory. I could never fight a Babaroi soldier in the open. The Babaroi I've dealt with so far were savages or disadvantaged like here on this hill. But on a team where others bring their own skills, there would be no stopping me." She refocused on the scene below. Seeing the stream that fed the twin water choked with neglect made her realize that just like the town needed clean waters to thrive, the people needed their freedom to live with dignity. The stream had once been a lifeline for the community, but now it mirrored the stagnation that had befallen the people. Though her mission to Kemet was essential, Asha knew she must put the people of Oricor first. With her knowledge, she could work on Dragon's Clash team and get them into the Overleague. This way, she could travel the rest of the way through the Babaroi kingdom unharassed. By helping these people, she would also be helping herself. Asha made her decision. She would stay and help the people of Oricor. As she turned to look down the other side of the hill, her eyes locked on the aftermath of her daring escape. The massive boulder she rolled down during the storm had done its job, crushing the 3 evil Babaroi storm reapers who had relentlessly pursued her. Their lifeless bodies lay there, cold and unmoving, a fitting end for those who had sought to harm her. Her heart still thumped loudly in her chest as she cautiously approached the fallen storm reapers. They radiated danger even after life. The gear they carried spoke of their sinister intent. They wore dark, daunting armor, a cruel reflection of their menacing nature. The armor, adorned with jagged spikes and twisted symbols, looked like it belonged to creatures of nightmares. Their weapons were equally foreboding. Each carried 2 viciously sharp blades stained with the blood of their victims. The weapons seemed to radiate malevolence, a chilling reminder of the violence they could inflict. As Asha gathered the gear, a mix of emotions swirled within her. She knew these men were wicked and had meant her harm, but taking their lives still weighed heavily on her soul. She had learned the lesson 10 times over that to survive in this unforgiving world, such sacrifices were the price. With the recovered possessions in hand, Asha knew she had an opportunity to turn the tables. Selling the gear in the marketplace could give her the means to buy her way into the circles she needed to enter. I can use one of these pieces to fashion new armor for myself and sell the other 2 in the market. In the small room with Alara, Asha spread out the Storm Reaper's armor. The daylight coming in from the cracks barely illuminated their menacing spikes and twisted metal. The air was heavy with the scent of aged leather, Babaroi sweat, and rust. With determination in her eyes, Asha began the challenging task of dismantling the evil gear. Each piece resisted her efforts, but she persevered, tearing off the wicked symbols and removing unnecessary parts. The old woman offered guidance with her aged hands as they worked tirelessly. Asha's muscles strained, but she pushed through, shaping and molding the armor to fit her form. The process was slow and demanding, but she refused to give up. Hours passed. Asha felt the weight of the work, yet it only fueled her resolve. This armor would be her shield against the brutality of the world, made at a time when she understood her own needs and made to fit her body and form. Her advantage was that she was fast, so the armor needed to be lighter and have full movement at the joints. The old woman knew how the game was played and understood by this time Asha's plan to join the local underleague team. Alara explained how, unlike real-world combat, if Asha played the thief, she would receive many more attacks on her back, as she would often be running away from the enemy. Asha made 2 pieces. The one thing she could wear daily was form-fitting leather that presented her as having a station in life. The other was the armor, either for the games or for her journey. Finally, everything was complete, starkly contrasting its malevolent origins. Asha put it on, feeling its weight and protection. She knew she had transformed it into a symbol of her strength. "Old woman, stop watching me change," she said, becoming annoyed at the constant stares. "Instead, go fetch me some dye, purple." The old woman's eyes gleamed with pride, recognizing Asha's tenacity. They exchanged a knowing smile, acknowledging the bond formed through this shared struggle. Alara nodded. She would do as instructed. She turned and left the small room for the bazaar. Asha waited. The world beyond was harsh, but she felt prepared to confront it with purpose and the strength she had honed through relentless determination and her iron resolve. Clash. It turned out that the old woman knew how to move suspect goods. Asha would have taken a full suit of armor out to the market. Alara knew that would raise suspicions. Instead, they spent the next 2 days separately wandering the market with a piece or 2 and allowing the street vendors, not the well-established ones, to yell offers for the items at them. They often took the worst deal, so they would be remembered as a sucker, versus two women selling murdered Reaper combat gear. Asha could get better deals if she wore her new clothes, but Alara cautioned against it. You are already too attractive. Wear the clothes I originally made you. It makes you less memorable, she had said a few times until Asha agreed. When we go to the match, you can clean yourself up to attract the attention you seek from Dragon. Asha allowed the old woman to keep a third of the money they raised. It was more than the miners made in a year, apparently. Clash was tomorrow. Asha had a hard time sleeping. She had heard so much about this brutal competition that she was excited to see it in person. As the restless night dragged on, Asha lay awake, unable to contain her excitement for the upcoming Clash match. The old woman, sensing her anticipation, decided to share some insights about the two local teams that would be battling in the brutal arena the next day. Apparently, she couldn't sleep either. There'll be quite the spectacle at tomorrow's clash, the old woman began, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and caution in the dark night. Two local teams will face off, the Scavengers and the Shadows. Both hail from different corners of our city, fighting hard to earn their place in the arena. Her eyes widened as she continued. The Scavengers come from the rough wastelands near the outskirts. Their armor might be cobbled together from scraps, but they've got the grit and determination that comes from surviving in those harsh lands. They'll fight tooth and nail to prove they belong. Asha nodded, her curiosity growing. She sat up and allowed her blanket to fall away, a gift to the old crow. What about the Shadows? She asked, eager to learn more about the other team. The old woman's expression turned crafty as she replied, her eyes straining as much as they could to glimpse Asha in the darkness. Now the Shadows are a sly bunch. They come from the dark alleys and hidden corners of the city. With stealth and resourcefulness that's hard to beat, they're a force to be reckoned with. Don't underestimate them. As the old woman spoke, Asha felt a mixture of excitement and caution. Sunlight began to shine through the seams between the walls and the roof. Asha felt the warmth of it. She opened her eyes to discover that the old woman was nowhere to be found. She rolled out of her small bed and stood up. It was a relief not to have eyes on her every move as she dressed. She put on her newly made clothes, leather pants and vest. They were form-fitting, and Asha knew she would attract attention. She went the extra step, washing in the old woman's tub and putting exotic paint on her face and exposed arms. She used a wild berry to color her hair, the same dark purples as the highlights on her clothes. The berry juice was sticky but would dry. She spiked her hair, allowing her muscular neck and shoulder physique to show. Her hair had grown back over the past several months. It wasn't as long as she usually kept it, but it was the perfect length for the style she used today. She used some black ash around her eyes and the berries to color her lips. When she returned to the mirror, she couldn't believe the transformation. Asha only left Atlantis 5 moons ago, but she had matured a lifetime since then. The scars visible on her shoulders and back, along with her athletic frame and makeup, presented a fiercely attractive, dangerous-looking person. Her exotic features hid the rage and determination of her eyes. The old woman returned, the outside sunlight bright when she opened the door. When Asha turned to greet her, the woman's mouth fell open. After a moment, she dropped to her knees, taking Asha's hand and holding it to her face. "I knew it," she said, failing to hold back tears. "Stand up, you old hag," Asha said, trying to pull her arm away to raise the woman. Alara ignored her words in motion. "I knew you were an Imperial from Atlantis. Why are you really here? Take me with you, out of this god-forsaken land." The old woman clung to Asha's hand and wept openly. Asha pulled her hand away using some of her strength. "I am still the same stray that you brought back to health. Don't lose yourself just because I clean up like a civilizee. I am only doing this to ensure I get Dragon's attention so I can propose our idea to him." Still on her knees, the old woman wrapped her arms around Asha's waist. "The Babaroi will see you and they will take you if you go into public like this. I should have been truthful with you. I allowed my pride to cloud my judgment." "What are you talking about? I've already arranged for you to meet Dragon at the match. That's what I have been out doing his morning." Asha frowned. "How? He's my son. The woman buried her head into Asha's middle and wailed, suppressing the sound through her closeness. It made sense to Asha and explained some of Alara's reverence for the games and deep knowledge of them. It also explained why she nursed Asha back to health if she thought Asha could elevate Dragon back to the Overleague. She's been playing me the whole time, Asha realized. But it's fine. Truth be told, she and I want the same thing. I need to travel east, and I can't do it alone, not in these lands. But if I am on a team invited to the Overleague, I'll be able to travel as far as the Citadel without harassment. If I understand the layout of the Babaroi Empire, as Alara has explained it, that's more than halfway to Kemet. As Asha and Alara walked towards the towering arena, a sense of hopelessness hung in the air. The entrance looked worn and neglected, reflecting the city's struggles. Inside, rust and bloodstains marred the walls, testaments to past battles. Asha was back in her peasant clothes. There were still traces of the colors she had put on her face and hair, but it was faded, making her look haggard. For the first time in their relationship, the old woman seemed more comfortable with Asha looking unattractive and nondescript. Sounds of footsteps and hushed conversations filled the space as they moved forward. Other spectators entered with mixed emotions. Some resigned, others hopeful. Vendors offered meager wares, and the smell of ale and roasted food mingled with the metallic tang of blood and sweat. Finding their seats, Asha gazed at the arena floor, feeling the weight of countless struggles etched into the sand. The atmosphere was overwhelming, reflecting the city's worn and battered state. The indoor arena was huge, much bigger than Asha had imagined. The playing field of Clash was a battleground marked by both danger and strategy. Stretching out before the eager spectators, the arena's floor was an expanse of hardened sand, scuffed and etched by countless clashes. Two raised daises stood at opposite ends, each adorned with an ancient and revered skull, a symbol of the team's ancestry and a connection to the souls of their forebears. In the heart of the arena stood a unique and captivating centerpiece, a raised platform adorned with intricate carvings and symbols of the city's history. Positioned equidistant from the opposing daises, it seemed to pulsate with a mysterious energy that drew the eye. "What's the center platform?" Asha asked Alara as they settled. Alara nodded. "The platform is an option. While Clash is a violent sport, both teams agree to refrain from mortal attacks. They can maim and injure, but no killing blows. It doesn't mean people do not sometimes die in the games, they do, but they die from their wounds, not direct attacks." Asha nodded. The old woman had explained all this already over the past weeks they were together. The rules change should any team member step onto the center platform. It is a declaration. It means that Clash is to the death, that there must be at least one sacrifice to award victory. Why would anyone ever do that? The idea sounded strange given the present dangers. Ilara looked around, checking something or looking for someone. It's a final act of desperation should you be ready to lose. In transitional games, it is employed from time to time, the important games. If you can get a fighter onto the platform before the opposing team returns both skulls to their das, you can reset the challenges by keeping the fighter on the platform and killing an opponent simultaneously. What happens if you kill someone in other situations? During the normal game? Asha asked. Ilara used her eyes to indicate the Babaroi guards positioned everywhere that she had been looking at. Then those big brutes take it out on the part of the city-state you represent. A deafening war horn sounded, right as the old woman finished. Asha recognized it. She had heard the Babaroi prepare for battle on the outskirts of the Atlantean farms. The horn was designed to strike fear into their enemies, and it certainly worked. The crowd grew instantly quiet. Asha looked around. There must be thousands of people in attendance, all equally spread out in the oval that sat above the arena. The air had a smoky quality, making it hard to see from one end of the stadium to the other. In the center of one side was fancy seating. Asha quickly realized this was where the Babaroi elite sat. One man, a giant warrior, sat in the center of this area. He stood and stepped forward. The man's voice boomed when he spoke. "My loyal subjects." Talon's voice resonated across the vast arena, a smug smile playing on his lips as he addressed the masses. Gathered here today, we witness a spectacle of raw intensity, an exhibition match between two teams from the Underleague the Shadows and the Scavengers. The crowd responded with cheers, eager to partake in the bloodshed that lay ahead. These valiant fighters, Talon continued, his words oozing with self-importance, they dare to seek glory and honor, just like my revered Ironclaw team from the Overleague. A sense of superiority tinged his tone, hinting at his belief that his Overleague team was far superior to any Underleague contenders. Today's victor, he declared, his eyes gleaming with arrogance, shall win a prize for their district. He held his hands up and turned to address the entire crowd. Extra food rations all around. The crowd cheered. Further, Talon continued, the winner here will be honored to face the best of the Underleague. The match is important. The winner of the next event will be this season's Underleague champion. The crowd murmured. It was impossible to read what the noise meant. Yes, Talon said in a comforting voice. Yes, my subjects, it is that time again. Last year, Dragon and the Vanguard challenged us. We all remember how that went. His voice got loud at the end, and the crowd laughed. Asha looked over to Alara, who had her head down and was visibly angry at Talon's mockery. She saw Asha looking at her. It didn't go well, was all she said. Talon continued his speech. This will be a new chance to test their mettle against the pinnacle of strength and skill. The crowd cheered, loyalty to their warlord evident, at least outwardly, and their excitement for the impending clash palpable. As we indulge in this riveting spectacle, Talon continued, he used the word riveting in mockery, let us remember the pecking order in our city-state. It is the realm of the strong, where the Underleague teams dance in the shadows of the triumphant Ironclaw. His veiled allusion to the Underleague's inferiority was met with fervent enthusiasm from the crowd, who embraced Talon's diluted perspective. Revel in this grand display of courage and ferocity, he exclaimed, and let it serve as a reminder of our city-state's unyielding dominance. The crowd cheered. It felt to Asha like they knew the speech, or at least the general parts of it, and knew when to applaud to keep Talon happy. War drums started beating. Again, just like the horn, Asha recognized them. The Babaroi used the same techniques and terrifying psychological weapons in the arena as in real warfare. The two teams entered from opposite sides of the arena. For all the talk about how ragtag these under-teams were and how poor everything was, to Asha, at least, they seemed both to be a formidable lot. The indoor arena buzzed with anticipation as the Shadows and the Scavengers entered. The thundering beat of the Babaroi war drums accompanied their arrival, reverberating through the arena and filling the air with palpable intensity. The Shadows, cloaked in solemn hues of deep navy and charcoal, displayed their team colors on banners held high with self-respect. Their eyes burned with fierce determination, a testament to the countless trials they had endured to stand on this stage. On the opposite side, the Scavengers paraded in, their colors strikingly contrasting earthy tones, adorned with their own distinctive banners. Despite their Underleague status, they strode with tenacity, their eyes ablaze with the hunger for victory. Wow! Asha was gripped by the moment. She turned to the old woman next to her and grabbed her hand. These are the underteams? She said, her eyes huge with amazement. Alara smiled. Yes, dear. We are poor people, but we are proud. Asha realized she was holding Alara's hand and let it go, looking back at the spectacle. The war drums were an integral part of the display. Their rhythm and noise seemed heroic in Asha's ears now, even though she knew the rhythm had not changed. The two teams circled the arena, and each stopped on opposite ends. How do they know which side is theirs? Asha asked. They recognized the skull of their ancestors on the dice. Alara returned, herself caught up in the spectacle, for the first time in a long time, not staring intently at Asha. So the team that loses, they lose the skull of their ancestors? Alara laughed out loud. Oh, sweetie, it's even worse than that. The winning team sometimes desecrates it. The Babaroi have a dark ceremony where they eat its soul at the end and break it down into a powder. It's how Talon and all the overlords believe they become more powerful. That's terrible. Asha was genuinely shocked. She remembered how revered the bodies of the dead were in Atlantis. The warriors there under King Atlas never desecrate those they defeated. They treated all the bodies with respect, even their enemies. Not here, Asha, she told herself. I must let go of my civilized views. Don't make a mistake and fall prey to these evil Barbaroi. The two teams each placed their flags and banners around their home dice. The teams huddled together, making last-minute plans after seeing the armor and weapons their opponents decided to use. Alara said when she saw the look on Asha's face. Asha nodded. The drums stopped. It was eerily quiet. There was a hush that fell over the crowd. In the silence, the shadows stepped away from the dice. They were each dressed the same. If they had different roles like Alara had explained Dragon's team did, it was not apparent from their attire. The scavengers were the team closer to the end that Asha and Alara were sitting at. They each did look very different. There were two big men in full combat armor, two more athletic-looking men in leather armor, and a short woman with thick legs who wore leather armor that somewhat resembled the piece Asha had crafted for herself. It wasn't as regal-looking, but it had the same configuration at the joints, allowing for complete flexibility and unobstructed movement. "Are females often the thief role you explained to me?" Asha asked. It was impossible to tell with the shadows, but on the scavenger team, the different roles seemed clear. The big men would guard their dais, the two athletic men would control the middle of the field, and the woman would use speed to try and acquire the other team's skull. The old woman nodded. "I guess, yes, now that I think about it, it is a role most suited to smaller and faster bodies." "Why are the shadow team all the same then?" Alara chuckled. "They play a very different strategy." "That's not really an answer," Asha said. "Watch," Alara said, patting Asha on the knee, but not taking her attention away from the goings-on in the arena. Both teams spread out on their side of the arena floor. The scavengers were in a symmetrical formation, their thief behind the two athletic men near the center, the two big warriors on either side of their dice and a few feet in front of it. The shadows were in more of a loose grouping. All five stood about 2/3 of the way back from the center, firmly between their dice and the opposing team. The horn blew twice more. On the second blast from the horn, the match began. The scavengers' front slowly advanced. The two men had short, curved sickles in each hand. The blades were in a unique configuration that Asha had never seen before. The handle could be griped by making a fist around it. Then the sickle blades extended forward and wrapped down around the knuckle. The scavenger's thief woman crouched low and stayed behind the two men as the three moved forward in unison. Asha paid particular attention to her so she could see firsthand what the role looked like in action. She had imagined in her head, but there was nothing better than real-world experiences. The shadows saw the advancing formation and all five members dashed forward. Something was going on with the cloaks that made them hard to follow, even though they were right out in the open. Sharp daggers emerged in either hand from each of them, and they covered the distance quickly. Clash was wild. Asha had never seen anything like it. The shadows were on them. The two scavengers' men stepped apart and raised their blades. The shadows moved past them, targeting the thief woman. The arena erupted into chaos as the shadows closed in on the scavengers. The scavenger's thief woman showed remarkable agility, dodging and weaving between the oncoming shadows, her empty hands raised in defense. However, the shadows seemed to move effortlessly through the chaos, their dark cloaks granting them a seemingly otherworldly advantage. The shadow daggers clashed against the scavenger's sickles with lightning-fast strikes, creating sparks illuminating the intense struggle. The two giant scavenger warriors rushed to aid their teammate, swinging their weapons at the shadows, but they couldn't land a blow. It was as if the shadows could anticipate their every move. Asha watched in awe and trepidation as the shadows overwhelmed the scavenger's defenses. The thief woman's movements became more frantic as she was surrounded by multiple shadows closing in from different directions. The shadows played a calculated game, drawing the scavengers' attention away from their original strategy. As the battle raged on, the symmetrical formation of the scavengers broke down. They regrouped several times, trying to adapt to the unpredictable nature of the shadows' attacks. Their thief stayed nimble, taking advantage of the distraction created by the shadows. She left the melee quickly and had their skull before the shadows knew she was gone. Despite their courage and determination, the scavengers were outmatched, but they had managed to take the Shadow's skull, so all was not lost. The Shadows worked seamlessly together, their movements flowing like water, while the scavengers struggled to coordinate amidst the confusion. The drums that once energized the crowd now started to beat again with a sense of tension and uncertainty. Asha's heart raced as she witnessed the intense battle unfold. Clearly, the Shadows were not just skilled fighters, but possessed some strategic advantage that the scavengers couldn't comprehend. They were somehow coordinated in a way that looked like random chaos, but wasn't. The audience, once enthusiastic, was now hushed, witnessing a display of skill and power beyond their expectations. As the match neared its climax, one of the Shadows stepped forward, a formidable figure who exuded an aura of darkness and command. With their face still cloaked in darkness, they were suddenly on top of the scavenger's thief, launching a swift and precise attack, causing the thief woman to stumble back, leaving an opening in her defense. The Shadows seized the opportunity, and with a synchronized effort, they disarmed the thief and surrounded her. The crowd gasped as she bravely stood her ground, refusing to surrender, clutching the enemy's skull. The other scavengers were down near the center of the arena. They were limping and immobile. The Shadows started charging the thief. Quick from all directions, she was being cut with each pass. Finally, she dropped to one knee, clutching her wounds, letting the skull fall to the ground, where it rolled to the feet of the closest Shadow. Moving fluidly, another Shadow glided to the scavenger dais and took its skull. They met another Shadow who had the skull the thief had taken. They casually walked back to their dais and placed both objects on it. The horn sounded, signaling the end of the match. The Shadows had won. Asha's curiosity burned even brighter. She understood the game. It was like many of the games she had played in school and with her friends growing up in Atlantis, different versions of keep away and scoring goals. Talon gave a speech about something to end the match, but Asha couldn't focus on it. Her heart was beating too loudly. She stood up to leave, as everyone else was. Alara pulled her arm. "Stay here. We'll let the place clear out and head down to the ready rooms where the teams congregate. Dragon will be there." Asha sat back down, almost too excited to wait. The Underleague. There was an entire subterranean world under the arena. Asha and Alara descended the hidden staircase behind the stands. Asha's eyes widened with wonder and amazement. The underground area was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was the antithesis of Atlantis, more like a descent to one of Poseidon's underground lairs ruled by his brother Hades. The torch-lit passageways stretched endlessly, revealing a vast labyrinth of interconnected chambers and training halls. Asha couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she absorbed the surroundings. The walls were adorned with banners and tapestries, showcasing the emblems of past victorious teams. The air carried a faint smell of sweat and the lingering energy of battles fought with unwavering determination. Alara led the way confidently, navigating the complex as if it were her second home. For Asha, however, each step was a revelation, taking her deeper into the heart of a world she knew little about. The sight of seasoned warriors, some still adorned in their battle attire, going about their daily routines left her feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. The deeper they ventured into the underground complex, the more Asha sensed an undercurrent of sorrow and despair. She saw the exhaustion etched into the faces of some warriors, the weight of responsibility they carried as they practiced for the next clash. The victories celebrated in the above arena were juxtaposed with the struggles and sacrifices in the gloom below. Asha's nerves fluttered as they approached the inner sanctum, where Dragon, Alara's son, and the leader of the best underleague team resided. She had heard much from Alara about Dragon and the underground team, and the stories now seemed almost too fantastical to believe. Dragon's tall and imposing figure dominated the room, his well-built frame exuding strength and confidence. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, revealing a face that bore the marks of countless battles. His piercing eyes, a mesmerizing shade of deep green, seemed to hold both the wisdom of a seasoned warrior and the depth of a leader who had seen it all. The chamber where Dragon sat exuded an aura of authority and battle-hardened wisdom. Asha couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and intimidation in his presence. Dragon's eyes bore the weight of experience, and she knew behind that stoic exterior lay a depth of emotions. Dragon stood amidst the training equipment, surrounded by his teammates, yet an atmosphere of regality seemed to envelop him, making the surroundings fade to insignificance. Unlike the extravagant robes of Talon up in the arena, Dragon's attire was practical and utilitarian, fitting the life of a warrior. His dark, well-kept leather armor bore scars and signs of wear, a testament to his trials. A finely crafted sword hung at his waist, a weapon that had seen its share of victories and defeats. But it wasn't just his physical appearance that made Dragon stand out. It was how he moved and carried himself. Every movement was purposeful, each gesture deliberate. There was a commanding air to him, and his mere presence seemed to hush the room, drawing the attention of all those present. As she observed him from a distance, Asha could sense the weight of responsibility he carried. Leading the best underleague team was no small task, and it was evident that Dragon took his role seriously. His eyes scanned the training halls, not missing a single detail, as if he had an innate ability to see the strengths and weaknesses of those around him. Yet, despite his regal demeanor, there was a sense of humility about him. Asha could see that he cared deeply for his team, and a genuine camaraderie bound them together. He led not with arrogance, but with a quiet determination to bring out the best in each of his teammates. Asha had been in the presence of high-ranking warriors and royalty in Atlantis, but at that moment, as she stood in the presence of Dragon for the first time, she knew what the epitome of a true leader and warrior was. Dragon could have stood with his head held high with the best of them. The practice areas may have been filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and shouts of training, but all of it paled compared to the force that was Dragon. Alara continued forward as Asha stopped to take it all in. Dragon turned his attention to her. "Mother," he said with what sounded like genuine affection. Alara and Dragon embraced a classic family hug that Asha had performed 1,000 times with her own parents. Witnessing it here, now, in this place, forced a wave of sadness through her. After a moment, Alara turned back and directed everyone's attention back to Asha. Dragon took the cue and studied Asha for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was just as commanding as his presence. He cut right to the chase. "So, this is the Atlantean that wishes to challenge Lycos for a position on our team," he said. It could have been phrased as a question, but it wasn't. The directness of it took Asha back, but his voice and commanding authority made his straightforward approach feel warranted. "Don't fold under the pressure," Asha scolded herself. "I'm going to have to earn his respect. It's now or never. I need this, or I will let my king and fellow Atlanteans down." "I am," Asha returned, raising her head. The room was quiet. The man who must have been Lycos stepped forward from the team to face Asha. Dragon watched and waited. When it was apparent that Asha wouldn't say anything else, he spoke, looking at Alara. "She does not know our ways," he said. Alara nodded. "She brings new viewpoints and strategies." Dragon scoffed. "She has never played the game and has only ever even seen it played once, and with the shadows nonetheless." Alara nodded again. "She has defeated Babaroy in single combat. She has stood one against many and emerged victorious." Dragon made the same scoffing noise, but the other team members, even Lycos, made a face of respect at the old woman's statement. "She is too weak and slow," Dragon said. Asha knew she would get a chance, as that was an empty complaint. She was strong and fast, and she could prove it. "Let me fight your—" She paused and looked Lycos up, and now with contempt. "Boy," an insult. "Here, now, I will show you what a slow and weak Atlantean looks like." She kept her head raised and looked as defiant as she could muster. Her challenge hung in the air for a moment. Then Dragon made a dismissive gesture. "We fight the shadows in 2 blinks, 6 days, and cannot risk an injury." He made the same valuative look at Asha that she had made to Lycos, from an inexperienced challenger. Asha did not miss a beat. "Do not worry, Dragon. I will emerge unscathed." It was a bold statement. Braggartism, really. Dragon stared at Asha hard. She couldn't read his expression, and she started to get concerned after a few moments. Then his features softened, first at the edges, then he allowed his face to change from a scowl to a smile. Alara pulled on his shoulder. He lowered his head. She whispered in his ear for several moments. He nodded as though she were making sense. Fine, he said when Alara was done. He straightened and looked at Lycos. Lycos, you are a good friend and a valued team member. Do you accept this challenge? There is no dishonor in declining it. This arrogant girl is not from our clan and does not know the blood we have spilled together. Asha's memory flashed to how Alara had described Lycos. Lycos, as fast and as cunning as he is, isn't aggressive enough. He doesn't possess the merciless edge required to beat the elites. He plays by the rules, even in this twisted game. He respects the spirit of clash, even when it is clear that those at the top do not. It makes him a good person, but not a great player. She made a quick plan. I'll need to show Dragon and the rest of the team here that I am a better fit. This lot respects the old woman. I must trust what she has told me. When the fight starts, I must bring him down quickly, following the rules or not. Lycos didn't hesitate. Of course, he said. We agreed early on to allow challengers. I'm not going to go back on our agreement now. Dragon nodded. Asha could sense just the smallest amount of resignation in his mannerisms. If Alara thought the rules bound Lycos, this little display here might help Asha's case. Telamon, Dragon turned to the giant warrior standing to his right. Get out the training pads and weapons. Telamon nodded and sauntered over to a storage area in the rear of their big chamber. You're protecting your boy, not me, if you want us to use children's toys, Asha said with as much confidence as she could display. She didn't feel confident inside, but she had been around this culture long enough to emulate it. Dragon made his scoffing noise, but didn't react otherwise. It was a demonstration of how much weight Asha currently carried. None. Telamon had 2 sets of padded armor laid out and 2 sets of wooden-looking, very short daggers. No, Asha said, instantly recognizing that the padded armor would slow her down and put at a disadvantage her speed and mobility. Those clothes are a prison for anyone with the talent you need for your thief role. She held Dragon's amused gaze, even though the intensity of it made her want to look away. Lycos walked over and started to put one of the padded suits on. Dragon continued to hold Asha's eyes until she finally looked away. She stepped over and picked up 2 of the 4 wooden daggers. They were a good weight, a solid approximation of the real thing. She turned to look back at everyone. They were each watching her intently. She then looked over to Lycos, who was in the middle of trying to get the armor over his head. Moving with every ounce of speed and strength she possessed, Asha was on him, while his arms were still up in the air and the chest plate was over his face. She rammed the dull wood blades into his side and stomach with all her might. She made slashing motions to demonstrate what would have happened had the blades been real. Lycos cried out in surprise and then in pain. Real pain, the blunt impacts hurting more than had the blade penetrating the skin, but doing less permanent damage. It was over in a flash. Lycos on the ground in the fetal position, the padded armor still covering his head and face as he wailed out in pain, clutching his middle. Asha threw the 2 daggers at him. Had they been real, they would have been the final blow. Instead, both bounced off his exposed underarms as he struggled. Dragon didn't do anything more but watch. Asha locked eyes with him, hers partially crazed at the exertion. When she recognized Dragon was not calling the fight, she shrugged her shoulder and started kicking Lycos in the gut as hard as possible. He cried out louder. Her repeated kicks took the wind from him. He started gasping and choking for air. Asha paused briefly, looked at Dragon, who was still in the exact same position of interest and amusement, then started stomping Lycos instead of kicking him. After a few moments of this, Dragon turned and motioned to Telamon, who quickly shot forward and pulled Asha away from Lycos's downed form. Lycos was slowly rolling from side to side and making a kind of groaning sound. A wet undertone to the noise suggested his lungs might have fluids in them after the beating. Asha realized she was screaming in rage as Telamon held her. He was forced to wrap his giant arms around her and lift her feet off the ground. She flailed around, trying to scratch or bite him in any way she could. It took her maybe 5 minutes to calm down. Finally, she nodded to Telamon that her rage was over. He cautiously put her back on the ground. "I'm sorry," Asha said to Dragon. She was shaking. "I have a lot of pent-up anger. I've watched the Barbaroi kill hundreds of Atlantean farmers, try to rape me multiple times, chase me through thunderstorms intent on murdering me, and slaughter my friend and cook her body over a fire for their damn dinner. Dragon looked from Asha to Lycos, then back to Asha. He then looked at his mother, Elara, and said, "She finally understands to offer her exploits. Maybe she can learn our ways after all." The shadows. Asha trained with Dragon and the team for 5 days. There was little time left now before the match. Lycos was now in the old woman's care. Asha wondered to herself if he would have to endure the same creepy overtones and innuendos. She decided she didn't care. Whatever else was wrong with the old woman, Elara seemed to have good intentions, or at least those aligned with Asha's goals. The training area was dimly lit, the walls lined with weapons and battle-worn gear. Telamon, the shield, sparred with Alcine, the spearhead, their movements fluid and precise. Telamon's shield blocked Alcine's quick jabs, and he countered with powerful strikes, displaying his strength and mastery of defense. Asha watched closely, trying to absorb the techniques, but knowing that she couldn't match their experience. Pyros, the bait, was training in a different corner of the room. He used clever tactics and misdirection to lure opponents into traps. Asha studied his techniques, understanding the value of guile and cunning in their upcoming clash against the shadows. Dragon, the marshal, stood at the center of it all, observing his team's efforts. He barked out commands, pushing them to give their all in the training. His voice had a sense of grit and determination, resonating with the team. Dragon's leadership was unwavering, instilling confidence and discipline in his comrades. During training sessions, Asha quietly practiced her new strategies, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, but learning from each attempt. She became adept at blending into the background, studying the enemy's movements and weaknesses without attracting attention. As the days passed, Asha's confidence grew, and she found herself becoming an integral part of the team's fabric. She admired their trust and loyalty to each other, knowing that it was essential for their survival in the harsh world of clash. In her solitary moments, she would replay the battles in her mind, analyzing what worked and what didn't. She kept her newfound insights locked away, knowing that there would be a time and place to reveal them. The skull, the ultimate prize in clash, remained at the forefront of her thoughts. She knew it would take more than physical prowess to capture it. Asha also realized she was becoming infatuated with Dragon. It was the first time in her life that she had to remind herself, not someone else, about the oath to King Atlas that she took before accepting her task. She found it hard to concentrate when he would instruct her, sometimes stepping in close and helping her position her weapon for offense or defense. She found herself getting flustered and sometimes losing focus. It took everything for her to keep telling herself why she was here and what the stakes were. 2 days before the match with the shadows, Asha felt comfortable enough to express her ideas. She found she wanted to impress Dragon as she had started hanging on his every word, compliment, or criticism. After a particularly intense training session, everyone, including Lycos, was sitting on the practice mat drinking water, exhausted. Dragon was in the middle of the circle of the rest of them. He used this strategy often to sit and discuss the training upon its completion, to reflect and reinforce the instruction. Each team member was given the chance to comment. Most often, there wasn't a lot said. When it was Asha's turn, she decided that today was the day, believing she had gained their trust and respect. "I have a question about the rules." She tried to start small so the conversation would grow in the direction she wanted to take it organically. Dragon turned to face her and nodded for her to continue. "Is anything preventing us from picking up our skull from the dice and moving it?" Dragon thought for a moment. "No," he said. "However, our basic defense strategy is based upon the idea that we are defending a fixed position." The 3 other people nodded their understanding. "Sure," Asha said. "But that's a strategy, not a rule, right?" "It is," Dragon said in his quiet but commanding voice. "I have a suggestion," Asha said. She found herself blushing some as Dragon turned his full attention to her. Dragon stared at her. "What if the first thing we did was have Telamon pick it up and put it under his shield instead of simply standing by the dice and waiting for someone to try and grab it?" That has never been done, Pyros said. He was young in mannerisms, but wise beyond his years in combat. Telemon's big, hulking form looked uncertain. What would I do with it once I took it? He asked Asha. Unlike Pyros, it looked like Telamon was trying to understand the strategy. You would defend yourself and not let the other team acquire the skull, Asha answered. Dragon watched the conversation intently but did not speak. Alcine spoke up. What's the rest of your idea? Asha smiled to herself but dared not show it. The rest of us charge as fast as we can, and we overwhelm whoever they leave to guard their skull. Then return it to our dais and rescue Telamon from whatever local trouble he is in. It won't take much to get our skull back on the dais, as we'll all be right around it. As would the entire enemy team, Pyros said, not seeing the clever ploy Asha was trying to convey. There is a reason we fight conventionally. Asha shook her head. I have only ever seen one match, I understand that. But the one match I saw was with the Shadows. They didn't organize themselves conventionally. I'm not saying this strategy would always work, or even work after the first time, but this match will be the first time, so we'll have the element of surprise. Alcine turned to Pyros. Yes, we'd all be around our dice, but that always happens anyway at the end. We all end up around the final dice. This would accelerate everything to the end game. Telamon nodded that he saw some benefits as well. It would mean the match only lasts a few minutes, not dozens of minutes or more. We wouldn't become as fatigued, and there would be less time for injury. Now everyone was looking at Pyros. You're a little young to be a traditionalist, Asha said to try and break the mood and move him forward. I am older than you, Pyros replied indignantly. I've lived my whole life around these games in this arena. Who are you to come in from nowhere and tell us how to play? Atlantis is far from nowhere, Asha said, herself getting defensive at the accusation. Both she and Pyros started to stand to escalate the confrontation. Sit, Dragon said softly. There was no mistaking his authority, even when using a low voice. Both Asha and Pyros resettled, fuming at each other. Pyros is right, Dragon stated calmly. He put a hand up to quiet Asha before she could protest. Asha, we have fought the Shadows before. We fought all of the underleague teams many times. He looked between her and Pyros, then said to Pyros, Don't gloat, Pyros. You are right. We all have grown up surrounded by this stupid sport. It's all we focus on. The Babaroi uses it to keep us busy and our focus elsewhere. It keeps us all docile and makes us easier to control. Pyros' confidence faded a bit as Dragon continued talking. We lose more than we win against the Shadows. We beat them in the same situation last year, which allowed us to challenge Talon. But this year, we have played them twice and lost both times. They are the only team we did not beat this year. We're lucky to be in the finals at all because of them. Telamon spoke up. Asha got the feeling he did not say much, as everyone listened with reverence when he spoke. If we can fight the Shadows unscathed, we'll be in better shape when we take on Talon. I think part of the problem last year was that we were reeling from the prior matches. Dragon looked at Telamon, then at everyone else. It seems like a reasonable evolution of the game strategy anyway, he said, holding eye contact with each person for a few moments as he spoke. The game always evolves. The goal is to finish and win, not anything else. Why not focus on the end game and not all the pieces that lead up to it? Asha was beside herself with nerves. The old woman had brought her homemade armor and her paints. Asa's hands were shaking so badly that it took her twice as long to apply the purples of the berries to her face and hair. She almost got the black ash she placed under her eyes in her eyes multiple times. Once finished, the effect was mesmerizing. Asha was transformed into a beautiful and deadly-looking thief. She hardly recognized herself. She had put on several pounds of muscle and lost all body fat. Not that she had carried much before, but now her look was sleek and dangerous. She put her 2 daggers into sheaths on either side of her belt. Once ready, she paced back and forth in her corner of the Vanguard's team's area. The others were ready and sitting near the middle of the room. Conserve your energy, Pyros yelled to Asha, who walked over and sat down with the rest of the group. How do you stay so calm? She asked aloud. No one responded. They sat there for a good while. Asha could hear the crowd coming in, and she heard the muffled undertones of Talon giving another speech. "Does that guy ever shut up?" she said, being serious. The others, except for Dragon, smiled and snickered. Dragon looked her in the eye very seriously. "Do your job today, and you will get the chance to shut him up yourself in a couple of blinks." Everyone stayed somber and nodded their agreement right as the horn sounded. It was loud even down here. Everyone except Asha stood up. "That's our cue," Dragon told her and offered her a hand up. Asha took his hand and stood with the rest. When she touched him, she felt a jolt of electricity and was instantly mad at herself for the thoughts running through her head. She could feel her face reddening. "They'll just assume I'm ready for battle," she told herself to get through it. People Asha was not familiar with suddenly entered the room. They were the standard bearers and carried the vanguard colors and flags denoting their past victories. Alcine motioned for Asha to stand beside her. Clad herself in battle-worn armor, she moved with a fierce determination that sent a ripple of awe through Asha. Her armor was a testament to function and style, a fusion of practicality and intimidation. A chest plate of darkened steel protected her torso, its surface marred by the marks of past battles. The armor's curves and angles accentuated her powerful frame, speaking of the strength she had honed through countless clashes. Strapped to her back was a massive, well-worn shield that bore the scars of many encounters. The shield's surface displayed a weathered emblem, symbolizing her team's unity and resilience. Alcine's grip on the shield's worn handle was firm and unyielding, revealing her readiness to defend her team at any moment. Her legs were encased in layered greaves, each piece meticulously crafted to offer protection and flexibility. Dark leather straps crisscrossed her thighs, adorned with small pouches and tools that showcased her preparedness for anything Clash might throw at her. Around her waist, a broad belt held her weapons, a handcrafted spear and a trusty dagger. The spear's shaft was polished and adorned with intricate engravings, the weapon of a warrior who knew how to strike with deadly precision. The dagger, nestled against her side, was a reminder of her skill in close combat. Alcine's helmet completed the ensemble, an embodiment of her fearsome spirit. The helmet's visor was sculpted into an aggressive snarl, its cold eyes seemingly scanning the arena for threats. A plume of dark feathers extended from the crown, fluttering with each determined step she took. As she walked, Alcine's movements exuded confidence and authority. Her battle armor clanked softly with every step, a rhythmic echo that resonated with her warrior's heart. Asha followed her in silence. The drums had started, and the whole underground was vibrating from the noise. The standard bearers went first, followed by Dragon, Telamon, Pyros, Alcine, and finally, Asha. The drums got louder as the team made their way through the torch-lit halls. Each step brought them closer to the brutal arena. The anticipation was a living pulse in the air, tangible and electrifying. And then they emerged. The transition was abrupt, like crossing a threshold into another world. The arena spread before them, a vast expanse of sand and stone surrounded by towering walls. The stands rose like ancient monoliths, their occupants a blur of colors and movement. The cheers and shouts of the spectators washed over Asha, a wave of sound that enveloped her senses. Her heart pounded in her chest as her eyes swept across the arena. The smoky light painted everything in a golden hue, casting sharp shadows that seemed to dance in rhythm with the beating drums. She felt small amidst the grandeur of it all, a single figure poised on the edge of destiny. Alcine's presence beside her was a pillar of strength, a reminder that she was not alone in this moment. Asha could feel the weight of her comrades' expectations, the hopes of the people they represented. This was more than just a clash, she realized. This was the first time she understood what it felt like to represent others. As they began to walk across the sand, Asha's footsteps seemed to echo with a profound significance. The ground beneath her feet held the stories of countless battles, the triumphs and defeats of those who had walked this path before her. The cheers of the crowd followed them, a chorus of anticipation that seemed to amplify with every step. Talon was still giving a speech, but Asha realized that no one was listening, at least no one down here in the arena. For the first time in her life, she saw an authority figure for what they were, figures. How empty is Talon's heart? that he needs to fill it with all this fake admiration, she wondered as she walked the path forward. Asha's gaze fixed on the center of the arena, where the platform stood. It was a stark reminder of the stakes, a visual representation of clash that was about to unfold, and the fact that it could turn deadly simply by having someone stand on the central platform. The sight sent a surge of determination through her veins, stoking the already lit fire within. She took a deep breath, inhaling the energy of the arena. The weight of her daggers in her hands was both familiar and reassuring. As Alcine continued forward, Asha followed, her movements steady despite the tempest of emotions swirling within her. Asha looked over to the other side of the arena, where the shadows were making their way along the far wall to their end. From the stands a few days ago, they had looked smaller and less formidable than the other team. But closer now, looking at them on the same level, Asha realized they were incredibly fit and wiry. It's like a whole team of thieves. Their strengths are my strengths, Asha realized. Is this really why Dragon let me on the team? Of course it is. He doesn't owe me anything. He hopes that having someone like me who can fight them strength for strength might even the odds. The trailing shadow, the one in the same position of the shadow line as Asha was in the vanguard line, turned his head to look at her. She saw the movement and locked eyes with the man under the cloak. At least, she hoped it was a man. All the shadows wore terrifying masks under their hoods. She had not seen them from the stands. This shadow team is much more formidable than I realized. Whoever or whatever was behind the mask seemed to smile an evil smile. Asha would swear she saw light coming from the eyes for the briefest moments. She felt a chill run up her spine. Alcine turned to her. "Don't let them get into your head," she said, then turned back around. When they got to their end, Dragon called everyone together. Asha had seen this last time. The teams had a chance to huddle right before the match began. "They're wearing their damn blood shadow armor," Lyko spoke quickly. Everyone turned to Asha, and Dragon spoke. "Asha," Dragon said, "we've never seen this armor. They keep it secret and only wear it in important matches. It's hidden under their cloaks, and no shadow has even been wounded or downed to the point anyone could get the cloak off them when they are in this stuff." Asha's mind raced. Are they faster, stronger, harder to hit? What? Faster, nimbler, Telamon said. Everyone stayed focused on Asha. Then the armor under their cloak is probably similar to what I am wearing now. She was careful not to gesture to the armor's weaknesses as she explained it. When Alara helped me make this, we kept the joints separated. We covered it with a softer cloth so it isn't visibly apparent. There is space around my shoulders, especially under my arms. Same thing for my legs and knees. Wide joints so there is no resistance to broad movement. Everyone nodded and contemplated how to adjust to take advantage of this suspicion. The horn sounded, ending the huddle and alerting the payers to take their final positions. Just before everyone turned, Dragon said to the group, "I think Ash's approach is going to work. They won't figure out what we're doing if we're brutal and fast until it's too late. Pyros, let's do Little Boy Lost. Otherwise, stick to the original plan." "What's a little boy lost?" Asha asked, but everyone sprinted away to their starting positions. Dumbfounded, Asha followed Alcine. She watched Pyros and thought she understood. They had practiced him staying by her side as they dashed for the dice, following Alcine and Dragon's charge. Only now, instead of standing next to her, Pyros was drifting away to their left. "This now looks like the unbalanced formation the shadows used in the last match," Asha whispered. "Quiet, girl," Alcine hissed under her breath. "Do as we trained. Leave the strategy to Dragon." Asha nodded and held her tongue. Before she could set, the drums started playing and the horn sounded. The match had begun. Her heart, which had already been pounding in her ears, was louder than the drums. She could feel their rhythm in her chest matched in perfect rhythm to her heart in her throat. The shadows were using a different strategy this time. They were in a balanced formation, with 2 people on the left and 2 on the right of the central platform. One shadow was staying back, presumably guarding the skull. As the first sound of the horn, Dragon and Alcine took off running. The sound of their armor rattling filled the arena. Asha followed close behind. The shadows were caught flat-footed, with only 2 team members in the way of the heavy vanguard warriors rushing forward. Pyros was making a racket, the other 2 shadows engaging with him, staying on opposite sides, lunging and retreating, their daggers making small cuts and wounds on his arms and exposed hands. Dragon and Alcine ran through the 2 flat-footed shadows, slamming into them and knocking them over with massive force. However, instead of engaging in combat, they kept running forward, moving slightly to the left and right so that Asha could sprint between them. They were close to the shadow's dice. The thief who was there had time to prepare and stood low, feet apart, blades out. Asha ran at him with all her speed. She put everything she had into covering the distance. They had practiced this. She would knock this last shadow over and grab the skull. By the time he recovered, even if quickly, Dragon and Alcine would be on him to keep him at bay, away from Asha while she did her work. But it didn't go like practice. Asha put her shoulder down at the last second to surprise him, but he was ready for it. Instead of bracing for the impact, like when Pyros had played the role in practice, he stepped to the side and forward. Asha missed him and went flying off balance. As Asha passed, the thief ran his dagger along her arm and shoulder. It found the cloth and separated it. The hardened leather armor covering her right arm flew off. Her shoulder had a deep gash, and blood started running down her arm and onto her hand, making the handle of her dagger slippery. As she stumbled, he followed her, spinning with a grace she didn't think possible. He got his other blade up under her chest plate near her ribs. She screamed in pain as the blade sunk deep and nicked a lower rib. She cried out in true agony. It was the most painful wound she ever received. Out of primal instinct, she fell to her knees and clutched her right side where the knife had penetrated. She raised one hand to protect her head and neck, sure a killing blow was coming. Then she remembered. This is a game. There is no killing allowed unless someone stands on the center platform. Asha realized that she had lost track of time. The intense pain from the wound was causing her to lose focus. She was bleeding heavily. Blood ran from under the leather and from the shoulder cut on her now exposed arm. She looked down, and there was a lot of blood on the sandy floor around her. I have to move. I have to get the skull off the dais. She tried to force herself to focus, but she couldn't. The rhythm of the drums consumed her. She started to lose herself in the noise. She felt lightheaded. Then she heard the horn sound. The match was over. What happened? I can't believe I eyed Dragon down. And the rest of the team. I needed them to make it to the Overleague so I could travel with them. But this is their life. They will now have to live in shame for another year, losing to the Shadows 3 times in a season and missing the opportunity to perform better in a match against Talon. Asha heard cheering, and Talon's speech seemed especially dark in vocal tone. There was a shouting match going on. Someone from the arena floor was shouting at Talon, who was shouting back. Asha's vision began to fade. She was starting to lose consciousness from the blood loss. She slouched down, still on her knees but losing the strength to hold her body up. Suddenly, Pyros and Alcine were at her sides. They were both ecstatic and were cheering, their arms raised. Alcine lifted Asha up and carried her. I'm sorry, Asha said. It was her first thought, and she couldn't express her disappointment in herself enough. Pyros examined her wounds while Alcine held her in her arms. 2 deep wounds, but she'll heal up fine, he said, a severe momentary look crossing his face between looks of celebration. What happened? Asha managed to ask. Did I mess everything up? Alcine's smile was huge. Mess up? Asha, Alcine was very sincere. We won. Your strategy worked. Asha couldn't reconcile a victory, given how badly her wounds hurt. How? She asked earnestly. Their man took me down so fast. I was supposed to steal the skull and run back to our side. Pyros said very kindly. Dragon wasn't going to put the entire battle into the hands of an unproven outsider, but he liked your strategy. I tied up 2 of them. The other 2 were knocked silly when Alcine and Dragon charged them. He smiled at Asha in a heartfelt way. And you tied up the last one just long enough for Dragon to get to their dice. The rest is history, Alcine finished. She had started walking back to the arena exit. What was the yelling? Asha asked, starting to relax and accept the outcome. Pyros looked at Alcine to suggest she answer. Dragon and Talon don't get along very well. she said, the jubilation of the victory fading at the realization. We've got 10 blinks, about a month, before the challenge match with him. It's going to be a death match, Pyro said. Talon seems threatened. There is no way they won't raise the stakes by using the center platform. Asha didn't know the history between the two, but she could imagine the intensity of the next clash given her first-hand experience. That's enough time to recover. I must participate. Please don't cut me from the team. I'll do better. That's enough time for me to learn more. You need a thief role like me who is fast and dedicated. We have to win. Alcine and Pyros exchanged glances. Asha couldn't read the exchange. What? She asked as they entered the torchlit tunnel that led back to their practice area. Sweetie, Alcine said, looking down at Asha as she continued carrying her. You weren't the thief. You were the bait. Part 3. Demons of Atlantis. The match was a disaster. Asha had convinced Dragon to continue to modify their gameplay, that focusing on pushing the competition to its deadly climax as quickly as possible. She hated being the bait, but embraced the role as it was the only path forward to what she needed. Talon had employed similar tactics. He didn't have to worry about rules or consequences like Asha and Dragon did. Talon ruled Oricor, the border mining town run by the Babaroi, enslaving its population after taking the city back from the shrinking borders of Atlantis. Nearing defeat in the match, Asha had wrestled Talon's team's skull off the dais and sprinted for the center platform. Dragon was beaten, willing to accept defeat in exchange for the safety of his team. Asha couldn't live with that. She needed to be on a winning team that would make the journey to the Citadel for the Overleague tournament. It was the only plan she had to aid her in her journey across the cursed lands of the Babaroi and on to Kemet in the Dark Lands. Invoking the dice changed the stakes. Asha had fallen into Talon's trap without knowing it. As soon as she stepped up on the platform, Talon's Ironclaw team ruthlessly began slaughtering her teammates. They apparently had spies and knew Asha's strategy. Everything was nearly over in that one moment, but Dragon was a warrior among warriors. He was the only one able to parry the deadly attacks and recover, slipping into his own blood rage and returning the brutal assaults, taking down all but Talon. He was wounded. The Ironclaw thief had run her blade across the back of Dragon's leg, severing several muscles. He was still mobile, but was limited in his movements. Some of the force of his strikes was diminished because of it. While Dragon dealt with the larger team, Talon targeted Asha to retrieve his team's skull. She rolled and dodged a few times while remaining on the raised platform, but was stunned by the first partial blow he delivered. He beat her down with the metal glove he wore on his fist. Talon could have ended her, but he did not. A glow in his eye and a comment about her seeing the fruits of her labor to the end. For good measure, when she was beaten, he took a blade from his belt and ran it across her face in a few places several times to make sure she remembered the loss. She screamed at the pain. The wounds were not deep, more a show of defeat and humiliation than anything. It had the desired effect as blood flowed from the injuries, obscuring her vision. Suddenly the drums stopped. The crowd grew silent. Asha frantically wiped the blood from her eyes so she could see. She was on the base of the dais, on her knees. Asha looked around at the vast stadium. She looked at the spectators, then up to the demons who had come from the Citadel. They sat on the royal observation platform that Talon usually occupied. Their polished black armor was made from some metal that seemed impenetrable by modern weapons. They wore skulls as masks. At least Asha prayed deep within her soul that they were masks. The rational parts of her brain believed what the old woman had told her, that the leader of the Overleague team, upon securing final victory in the tournament, was promoted to the ruling council, their ancestral skull from the match, now their new persona. But part of her believed the other stories, that the Babaroi ruling council was comprised of demigods, or a race of people from the sky, evil, powerful, and vengeful. Talon and Dragon circled each other amongst the carnage. Asha found she was weeping, her tears mixing with the steady flow of blood down her face. Talon carried a war club, a brutal weapon. He dragged it on the ground behind him as he moved. It seemed like his stance and movement would slow him down or be a vulnerability, but it wasn't. He was so strong and fast that he could avoid Dragon's powerful assaults with seemingly simple ease. Asha realized that having the thief maim Dragon must have been a strategy in anticipation of this moment. She wanted to call out to stop the match. Her heart ached watching Talon humiliate Dragon. Dragon was valiant. He moved with grace and purpose, but Talon was faster, stronger, and dead set on ending their rivalry now, in the moment. From nowhere, moving so quickly it was shocking, Talon spun his club in an arc and slammed it down onto Dragon's shoulder. The sound from the club on Dragon's armor rang out in the hushed silence. There was another sound underneath it, the sound of bone breaking. Asha immediately realized that Talon had just crushed Dragon's right shoulder, his primary arm. She realized she was screaming, "No," in a long wail. Talon stopped and turned to her. She could see his menacing smile under his helmet. He winked at her and held eye contact as he brought his club down into the center of Dragon's head. She felt her voice go silent, her scream fading without ending. The war club was stuck in place. It was hard for her to understand what she was seeing. The club was too far into Dragon's helmet. There was no room left for his head. Very slowly, she processed what this meant. She felt the arena spin, seemingly moving from right to left over and over as her head swooned. She looked back, and Talon stood over Dragon's body as it slowly lost movement and slumped to the ground. However, Talon wasn't looking at Dragon. He had locked eyes with Asha and seemed to be studying her. She felt fear like never before. She realized she was sobbing deeply. Then she felt a rush of pure terror at Talon's next motion. She would have accepted her fate had he come over to strike her down. She was prepared to fight and die. It was part of being on a team in the arena of the match. But Talon didn't retrieve his weapon. Instead, he turned and started to remove his armor. He took his helmet off. The horror and brutality of his face repulsed her. Then he removed his upper armor. She didn't understand. The skin of his chest and arms was red, just like Asha's. He is an Atlantean. Asha realized but couldn't process what it might mean. Talon's chest was overly muscular and covered in healed wounds. Asha watched, still not understanding. Maybe the match is over, she thought to herself. Then Talon unbuckled his pants. They fell away. He was aroused. This was the Babaroy way. Asha knew. Then she understood. He meant to rape her in public while the crowd cheered. A final humiliation. Her body could not process more fear. She was at her emotional limit. Instead, she felt a wave of sadness and melancholy. How had it come to this? How had she been so naive and arrogant? Talon was close. He lifted his arms and played to the crowd. She couldn't hear them over the rush of blood in her ears. He had his back to her, his arms raised, showing himself off, slowly turning. Asha found the strength to move her hand to her belt. Her blades were there. She found the strength to grab one, then the other. The crowd was chanting something. She could hear the edges of it, but couldn't make out any meaning. Through sheer force of will, she pushed herself to her feet. Blood ran down her face. She held her small knives, one in each hand, holding them so tight that the wiry muscles in her forearms bulged. The crowd was in a frenzy now. Talon seemed confused about something and started to turn back to her. She realized she was screaming again, only this time it was a war cry of rage and anger coming from somewhere deep within her soul. As Talon faced her, his state of arousal infuriated her. In a move of pure instinct, moving faster than she would have thought possible, Asha ran one blade low and the second high, then stepped back. Talon gasped. She watched the light fade from his menacing eyes. He fell to his knees, using his hands to try and stop the bleeding from his two wounds. It was hopeless. He bled out as Asha stood over him. She was stunned at what she had accomplished. The arena was quiet again. After a few moments, she could make out the crowd chanting her name. Not knowing what else to do, she stepped over Talon and the growing puddle of blood under him, picked up the two skulls from both teams, and slowly, still in shock, walked back to her home dais and placed them on it. The crowd erupted in cheers that lasted much longer than Asha remained conscious. Later, Asha opened her eyes, but couldn't see. She felt a rush of panic before realizing there were bandages on her face that covered her eyes. She moved her hand up to her face and winced in pain, her side lighting up on fire when she moved. Trying again more carefully, she managed to get her hand up. She felt the bandage and found an edge, which she pulled on to remove the yellow linen weave from over her eyes. She expected to be back in Alara's small hut near the central market. Instead, she found herself in some type of holding cell. It was very dark, the only light coming from low candlelight down the hallway on the other side of the cell bars. Alara was there, tending to her, sitting on a small bench. "Where am I?" she asked Alara, who had not yet noticed she was conscious. "Oh, there you are," the old woman said, and walked the few feet to the haystack Asha had been positioned on. Alara was an old woman. She was wrinkled and unpleasant looking, even though she had the appearance around her edges of someone who may have been attractive in her youth, but a hard life here in Oricor had taken both her youth and beauty over time. Alara took Asha's hand. She had become a quasi-surrogate mother to her, although Alara was also a pervert who barely held back her desires for Asha. At least that was before. Asha sensed none of the silly antics or misplaced touches she often dealt with concerning Alara. She just lost her son, Dragon, Asha reminded herself as she tried to sit up, grateful for Alara's presence. Asha's right side was going to be a problem. She could feel a persistent pressure that suggested more than one rib was broken. "I'm sorry about Dragon," Asha said after her repositioning. Alara made a sad face and squeezed Asha's hand with hers. "He was the best of us, that is for sure." She released Asha's hand, which surprised her, and then wiped away her tears. Asha could see Alara had been crying a lot. Her eyes were an unhealthy red. "I tried once, I understood what was happening," Asha choked up at the end of her statement. Alara got sadder. "You silly child," she said, a small amount of anger present that Asha didn't understand. "You lost. You should have just taken your humiliation." Asha felt a wave of anger herself. "You would have me violated in public?" Some fire was in her voice. "For what? For punishment because Talon bested your boy? You know I took the oath from the king. You know what that would have meant." She instantly regretted her anger and her statement, but there was no taking it back now. It hung in the air for a moment. Asha expected a fierce retort, but Alara seemed beaten. "What is it, you old hag?" Asha said very compassionately. Alara began to weep. "By King Atlas himself, what is it, old woman, that has got you so defeated?" Asha exclaimed. It wasn't like Alara at all to act this way. Alara retook Asha's hand and sat down next to her. "You don't know the rules," Alara said softly, her eyes down. "You should have studied. You should have listened to Dragon about everything. Instead, you just waited for him to stop teaching each day and would then go back to blathering on about your theory regarding a new strategy." "You don't think I wanted this, do you?" Asha was confused. Alara scoffed. "Why do you think we are in the prison below the arena? Is that where we are?" "You beautiful, dim-witted child." Alara patted Asha's leg, a little too high on her thigh for comfort. "There's the old pervert I know and love," Asha said, oddly relieved at the move. She had begun to fear losing Alara's goodwill if Alara was going to blame her for her son's death. "Asha," Alara was stone cold. "Once you invoke Matchu by standing on the center dais, you cannot re-enter the battle. That's the price. That is why it is only a last resort." "But I didn't re-enter the battle." Asha knew the rule. She had spent weeks studying everything as they prepared for the match. "Of course you did," Alara shouted, real anger coming through and directed at Asha. Asha felt the weight of it, no different than had Alara slapped her scared face. Then she realized what Alara was talking about. "You mean when Talon came to rape me?" Indignant herself now. "What would you have had me do? Bend over and say thank you?" The anger between the two dissipated as quickly as it had risen. "It doesn't matter now, child," Alara said, her gloom and sadness returning. Asha realized something was very wrong. It finally dawned on her what it might mean that she had awoken in a holding cell and Alara's odd mannerisms. "What is going on?" Asha asked, her voice the opposite of before, now timid and fearful. "There will be a trial. You will be found guilty, and you will suffer a fate 100 times worse than if you had simply endured your shame in the arena." Asha felt real fear. She felt a shortness of breath and pushed back a feeling of panic. Her eyes grew big. Her voice was small. What would be 100 times worse than Talon raping me in public while the sick crowd cheered on? Her imagination started to provide images of what this might be, which repulsed her and terrified her even more. The old woman felt the chills that ran through her body. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she said, gently embracing her. "I will see if I can get you some hemlock or other poison." It took a moment for the statement to register. When it did, Asha pushed Alara away. For what purpose? Asha's eyes were bright. Her voice held a small amount of returned inner resolve. "It's the only way to keep your oath," Alara said sadly, then added, "I assume what happens after you pass does not matter." She trailed off. Asha understood the realities of the situation. "When?" she asked, even more confident now. "I will go now," Alara said, pushing herself up. Asha grabbed her arm, allowing the strength of her grasp to remind the old woman of her place. "No, you antique witch. Not the poison. When will the trial be?" Alara was caught by surprise and had to think for a moment. "As the accused, you are entitled to be tried when you have recovered. However, the demons will not wish to stay here for that long. They already yearn to return to the comforts of the citadel." Alara resumed her place by Asha's side. "Why did you have to break the rules in front of them? It's an insult. We stand a real chance of having the Babaroi soldiers return. The Storm Reapers, or worse, of being wiped out in retribution to the insult." "When, old woman?" "I imagine tomorrow," Alara said, defeated. "Good." Asha winced, pushing herself to a full sitting position. "Then we don't have to continue these pleasantries much longer." Later, the herald's voice reverberated across the stone walls of the arena, his words taking on an almost physical form as they rippled through the crowd. "In this most sacred arena of destiny and doom, under the shadow of the citadel, and before the scrutinizing eyes of our invincible demons and the unyielding spirit of the Babaroi people, hear me." A low murmur of assent rippled through the crowds of spectators, each clad in various representations of Babaroi culture: leathers, furs, and ornate masks. The gravity of the charges seemed to collectively descend upon the audience, their faces a mixture of anticipation and approval. "We drag forth Asha, this foreigner from Atlantis, charged with committing an act so heinous it defies the very bedrock of our venerable and sacred codes." In the shadowed recesses of the observation platform, the Demon Council sat in an air of detached seriousness. Each was clad in gleaming black armor forged from a mystical metal that seemed to absorb the light around them. Skull masks obscured their faces, each a haunting work of art, intricately carved and terrifying to behold. "Hear this." Asha invoked the almighty decree of the center dice, escalating the ritualistic warfare of the match to an ultimate contest of life and death. Yes, life and death. One demon leaned back, the joints in its armor creaking softly, while another casually twirled a stylus-like object between its fingers. They appeared as if they were barely listening, so used to these kinds of proclamations that the words had lost their weight. But she defiled our ancient laws by daring to step back into the hallowed circle of combat. A circle carved by the gods, bound by the bones of our ancestors, and sanctified by the blood of heroes. On the arena floor, Asha stood on crutches, her eyes upward as she took in the spectacle. She felt dwarfed, not just by the towering architecture surrounding her, but also by the weight of tradition and dogma that the herald's words had conjured. Alara had rebandaged her face, using long, thin cloth stripes to cover the wounds. The Babaroi offered Asha no other modesty. The old Asha would have been uncomfortable and embarrassed. The new her was so used to being mistreated and gawked at by the old woman that she did not care in the least whether they allowed her to cover herself or not. "So, Asha, what say you now? How do you plead before the omnipotent gaze of our demons and the ever-present holy entities that guide our fate and fortify our indomitable spirit?" The herald paused, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at Asha. Her gaze briefly met those of the masked demons above, and for a moment she felt the oppressive force of an entire culture's judgment bearing down on her. Yet she gripped her crutches tighter. She had a defense to make. Her form was thin, black and blue from the prior day's match. She had most of her weight on her left foot. Pain shot up her side and back if she put too much weight on her right foot. Alara had given her a crash course in the rules of the trial. Asha knew she had a few formal rights. Not many, but she could use the few this process did offer. She knew it was hopeless. Everything was hopeless. Asha was learning how to be in the moment, how to focus on the task at hand instead of constantly dreaming about tomorrow. I invoke my right to hear a formal reading of the law under which I stand accused, she called out, her voice strong yet tinged with an almost imperceptible quiver. There was fire on her right side as she took a deep breath to deliver her request. She knew there was no chance of a physical escape. She could not currently fight her way out of a slight breeze, much less trained Barbaroi warriors. A brief murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd, a subtle deviation from the well-worn script that such trials usually followed. Up on the platform, one of the demons stopped his stylus twirling and leaned forward, a spark of interest now kindled. The herald cleared his throat, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to emerge from the earth's bowels. "Very well," he bellowed, his eyes meeting Asha's as if measuring her very soul. "The immutable covenant of the glorious match decrees in language as old as the mountains and as sacred as the heavens. Whosoever dares to summon the gravity of the center dais, converting a bout into a mortal clash, relinquishes all right, by the gods and the cosmic order, to step foot again in the revered arena of struggle. To breach this sacred command is to risk expulsion from the unity of the state and the continuity of our way." The crowd listened, their collective breath held in anticipation, while the demons above nodded as if approving of the herald's rendition of the ancient words. Asha was well educated. She was a tradesman's daughter in the capital city of Atlantis and was always at the top of her class, both in academics and physical competitions. She reminded herself to stay calm, focus on her words' basic logic, and remember her audience. These were all skills she learned debating in school. "I can win this," she told herself, feeling a rise of confidence. She knew the Barbaroi were savages, but she also knew they had a twisted sense of control, often accepting literal explanations over theoretical observations. "Thank you, Herald," she yelled with as much authority as she could muster through the shooting pain in her side. "You have just proved my innocence. What a blessed day!" Another one of the bored demons leaned forward, interested now. The crowd gasped. "Blasphemy!" the herald yelled, indignant. He was a short, heavy Barbaroi in ceremonial robes. Asha saw just the slightest look of uncertainty cross his face. His mind looked to be racing to try and figure out if he had, in fact, made some mistake. "Have no fear, Herald. I do not invoke my right to charge you with blasphemy." The crowd murmured. There were just a few laughs, immediately silenced, from the large group lining the sides of the arena watching. One of the demons raised its hand into the air. The crowd immediately went silent. "Speak your case," the demon said. Its voice was loud and full of bass. Asha could feel the ground beneath her feet vibrate as the thing spoke. She pushed back real fear and continued. "Thank you, my lord." She looked at the demon and bowed as best she could to show respect. "We have all heard the law read. Am I the only one with ears? Re-enter the combat circle? Risk expulsion?" She let the two statements hang in the air. All four of the demons were interested now. The crowd was interested too. There were again many murmurs. The herald looked just the tiniest bit uncertain. He looked back to the four demons. One nodded to continue. He turned back to Asha. "Those are two challenges to the law," he yelled down as though correcting a schoolchild. "Perhaps, in your current," he made a pretend show of studying Asha, "state you are too cold for your brain to work right." He waved his arm, suggesting he had just insulted Asha. Everyone remained silent. It became uncomfortable. The herald tried to recover. "Explain your point about risk," he said, still working to sound like he was in control. "Certainly, Herald." She used his position as though it were his name, then turned to the demons, who were all looking at her intently. Asha focused herself, doing her best to remain calm and treat this like a school assignment. Never mind that her life depended on her ability to convince these barbarians about their own laws. To breach this sacred command is to risk expulsion from the unity of the state and the continuity of our way, Asha yelled back, repeating the line she wanted to address. "Your very law says someone risks expulsion. I have been with you long enough to know that only your laws protect us, so to be expelled from the continuity of your ways means to be outside of the state's protection. I fully understand the weight of this punishment. That said," she continued, "you have the power to decide either way. Yes, I risked expulsion. Risked. It is not a foregone conclusion once I address my second point. She stared up and noticed the seated demons leaning toward each other to speak in low tones no one else could hear. She thought she saw the slightest of head nods to the affirmative. She hoped this meant she had set the correct foundation, and they accepted their ability to be proper judges. The judges know their role, and they know our laws better than you, Atlantean, making a point to emphasize her heritage with the proper amount of disgust. How dare you presume to instruct us? But the herald's bravado was short-lived, as the demon who had first found Asha interesting said something that caused the herald's face to change and show just a hint of panic. He nodded to the demon and made a hurry-up hand gesture to Asha. "You are wasting our time. What is your second point so we can proceed with the judgment?" he yelled, speaking more to the crowd than Asha. He gave just a slight nod back to the seated demons, who did not acknowledge the gesture. Asha nodded. "Fine, we can address this second part of the law." She almost said your law, but caught herself. She didn't need to continually emphasize how much of an outsider she was. Whosoever dares to summon the gravity of the center dice, converting a bout into a mortal clash, relinquishes all right by the gods and the cosmic order to step foot again in the revered arena of struggle. She tried to play to the crowd. Her side screamed in pain as she yelled, but she was getting used to it. Asha focused with as much menace as she could, given she was stripped naked, on crutches with multiple broken ribs, and with blood-soaked bandages covering most of her face. "Is this what I am accused of?" she yelled, staring directly at the herald. The man waved dismissively. "You waste our time again. You know this is what you are accused of. You are repeating the law as I read it to you." Asha was brazen. This was her whole defense. She almost had it completely set up. "Is there a penalty for lying to this court, Herald?" she said with as much authority as she could muster. He remained casual, believing he had the superior position. "There is, my scrawny, unattractive friend. Death." He tried to play to the crowd, which only partially responded. Some people were starting to see the case that Asha was building and the trap she had set for the herald. Asha knew the Babaroi venerated strength. She tried putting weight on her right foot. A tremendous amount of pain shot through her, but she found she could tolerate it. Barely. Now was the time if there was going to be one. She made a dramatic show of collecting and throwing the two crutches to the side. The move worked about as well as the herald's last barb. Half the crowd made murmurs of support. "Progress," Asha rationalized. She spread her arms and took a few steps forward. "Who then brings this charge?" She gave it everything she had. "Who claims that I set foot back into the area before the match was over? This is a lie. I have 1,000 witnesses. Judges, you witnessed the match. Did I leave the center platform? Did I violate the law?" There was a low gasp from the crowd as they understood her challenge. She was correct. Talon had advanced on her. He stepped onto the platform. She did not leave it. The herald's face twisted as he worked on a retort, then paused. This happened a few times. Finally, with little clarity or confidence, he said, "No, you are twisting the meaning of the law." But he knew that it was not true, even as he said it. Everything was quiet for a very long time. The large crowd slowly developed anticipatory whispers. Apparently, Babaroi trials didn't usually take this long or have as much uncertainty in their outcomes. No one seemed to know what to do. The herald had lost confidence. He looked between the four-seated demons and Asha on the arena floor below. The same demon who had initially shown interest in Asha stood up. The crowd fell silent again. The man, or whatever was underneath all the armor and mask, was tall and imposing. He walked to the front of the platform where the herald stood, and, very casually, upon approach, he pushed the man off the edge. The herald fell 30 feet or so to the arena floor. He landed with a thud. After just a moment, he moaned and turned over. He was stunned by the long fall, but nothing seemed to have broken when he landed on the soft sand of the arena. Asha did everything she could to steady herself and not display, at least outwardly, the chilling effect the move produced. "You do not look very impressive, little one," the demon spoke, looking down directly at Asha. Its voice was so low, so loud, and so heavy that it felt like a physical force washing over her as the sound moved down into the arena. Alara had briefed Asha as best she could about the delicate balance Asha would have to walk if allowed to speak directly to one of the demons. They were known by their team name. They were the Demons of the Citadel, one of the championship overleague teams permanently housed at the Bobroy capital. Asha's mind raced. She realized only 4 demons were up there, not 5. 5 was the necessary complement of a team in the match. "The view is better from down here, Master," Asha yelled back up, allowing her voice to show defiance, but also carefully showing respect by calling the man in the armor Master. The demon might have smiled underneath his skull mask. Asha could not tell from the distance she was away. "Explain it to him," the demon said, again casually, given the violence his statement implied. The herald's eyes got wide. He understood his predicament. He was still stunned by the fall. Asha watched him use every effort to get himself to a sitting position, then quickly to a standing one. She thought of launching herself onto the fallen man. He didn't have armor, just ceremonial robes, but she couldn't envision it going well. She was in too much pain just standing. She knew she only had a moment before the herald's vulnerability would dissipate once fully on his feet. As he struggled to stand, she moved as rapidly as she could. Her entire body was on fire. She grabbed one of her displaced crutches, then ran at the arena wall a few yards to her front. She held the crutch at an angle. When it hit the wall, the force of her momentum broke the bottom, leaving a jagged wooden point at the end. Without an ounce of wasted movement, she turned and charged the herald, who was now completely standing, trying to think of how he could leverage the situation. He watched her charge, planted his feet, and leaned forward. But he was no warrior, not one used to this type of brutal arena combat anyway. Asha easily maneuvered around his attempt to block the crutch. She ran him through the middle of his stomach, then released the makeshift weapon, spun, and kicked him in the head with all the centrifugal force she could bring to bear. His eyes went lifeless before his head hit the ground. Asha fell, clutching her right side in agony at the exertion, but she had extinguished the man. There was clapping and subtle cheers from the crowd. As quickly as she could, but not quickly in the grand scheme of things, Asha recovered and returned to her feet. She was covered in the dirty, oily sand of the arena floor, an equal measure of perspiration and blood helping the sand stick to her exposed form. The pain in her side hurt so badly that tears flowed over the bandages on her face. She had one arm pressed into her right side and her other hand clutching her arm to pull it tighter. For some reason, holding her side like this made it feel slightly less painful. The demon stood tall as he spoke. "I know you are in pain, little one," it said in its booming, terrifying voice. "Thank you for showing me that you understand the difference between pain in the body and pain in the mind." Asha tried to nod, but her shaking muscles didn't respond as she wanted them to. She realized she was sweating and trembling slightly from the pain. "Do you know why we are here?" it asked her, moving its armored hand to indicate itself and the 3 other giant warriors still seated behind him. Asha felt darkness at the edge of her vision. She knew she was close to blacking out. She also knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to talk to a team from the Citadel, and if she fell unconscious, she would undoubtedly be killed or worse. "It is not my place to worry about such things, Master," Asha called back up. Her voice broke in the middle, but she pushed through. The response got mixed feedback. One of the seated demons made a bored look and leaned back. A different one focused more on Asha and leaned forward. The standing demon put his foot on the platform ledge, raising his knee, which he leaned into when he yelled back down. "I am not one to ask a question twice," it said. Its voice was pleasant, which made the statement even more terrifying. Asha understood the situation. "My lord," she started, "you say you are an overleague team from the Citadel?" The thing didn't respond immediately, then something clicked, and it said, "I do say that, yes. And there are 4 of you, not 5? Asha yelled up at it. "There are," it said, its voice still amused. Asha nodded, looked to the larger crowd, then back to the standing demon. "You came to recruit Talon to be your 5th. A shock went through the crowd. "No, little one," the demon said, its voice changing from amusement to that of a master instructing a pupil. "We came to audition the winner of this underleague contest to be our 5th. Asha nodded her head knowingly, then yelled, How am I doing? The demon stood motionless momentarily, then leaned its head back and began a deep belly laugh. It was a loud, terrifying, and unpleasant sound. The thing's shoulders shook up and down as its laughter filled the arena. After a few moments of this, it leaned back onto its knee and looked down at Asha. "I am on the fence, little one," the demon said with equal measure of hope and despair. "Send down another herald. Maybe I can convince you." Asha tried to return the comment with menace, but even she could feel it came out a little comically. The demon laughed again, but not as loudly. "I must ask you questions here, in this forum. Your answers can only hurt your chances. Do you understand?" Asha didn't understand most of the last several months, so not understanding the demon's contradictory comments wasn't anything new. "No," she yelled up, deciding that it was better to be honest. "But please proceed." The demon straightened, so it spoke as much to the crowd as to Asha now. "You are an Atlantean," it stated in an accusing tone. "A proud one. You have undertaken a quest from your king?" "I have." "And you took the oath as required by your king?" She hesitated just a split second, then answered as before. "I did." "Part of your oath was that we, Babaroi, are your sworn enemy?" She caught herself, realizing the question was not accurate. "That is not part of any oath my king would ever ask of me or any Atlantean," she yelled back after another moment of thought. "What is your mission?" Asha didn't hesitate this time. There was no point in holding any information back. It didn't matter. "I am taking the information I have memorized to Kemet in the Dark Lands." The demon nodded as though some piece of data had just been verified. "We are at war with Kemet," it shouted down with some anger. Ash replied with the same fire in her voice. "You are Babaroi. You are at war with everyone." The demon laughed loudly. The crowd followed and laughed once they saw it was safe to do so. "You have spoken the truth," it said, its voice softer than before, but still audible in all corners of the vast indoor arena space. "Now, on to your pathetic body." Asha felt a small rush of frustration. There was nowhere to hide. She was what she was at this point. Months of constant training and the poor resources available inside Orekor had caused her to lose all but essential body mass. She decided to be indignant, as there was no denying her weakened appearance at this point. "I was the fastest runner in Atlantis, one of the smartest in all the schools. I have learned to be fast and brutal in dealing with you accursed Babaroi. I have beaten storm reapers while striped just as bare as I am now. If you were smart enough to give me a few decent meals, you might find this form more pleasing and dangerous." She spread her arms to show herself off, imitating Talon's final display before she had killed him. The crowd roared with good-spirited laughter, as did the main demon and all but one of the seated ones. Asha's display was not impressive, but that was the point. She had made it masterfully, turning her visible weaknesses into philosophical strengths. Her message was clear. If she could beat Talon and be the only survivor of the match championship in her current state, imagine what she could do with proper nutrition and recovery. Later, "Are you out of your mind?" Alara berated Asha, who was back near the city's primary market in Alara's modest hut. Asha wasn't interested in the old witch's rants. "You know I aim to get across this cursed continent to Kemet. Traveling with the demons to the Citadel gets me more than halfway there." Then she felt like making a point. "Unmolested, I might add." "Ha," the old woman spat. "You don't know what the demons intend." "Of course I do." Asa wasn't confused about the situation. "They intend the same thing that you do, or that Dragon did, or anyone else in this accursed land intends, to use me up and spit me out." "Ha," the old woman spat again, but didn't continue with her complaints, instead shifting the conversation to her actual concerns. "So that's it? You get my son killed and then abandon me? After everything I have done for you?" Asha realized Alara was right, at least from her perspective. She had taken Asha in and helped her recover from nearly mortal wounds. In return, Asha helped to botch what should have been Dragon's triumphant return to the Overleague. And now, from Alara's perspective, it was Asha who had used her up and was now dismissing her. Asha felt a wave of regret wash over her. "You are right, you old hag. The more I am in this godless land of yours, the more I have to guard against adopting your customs as my own," she said as she stood up off the bed. She wore a single nightgown. The bandages on her face had been changed and were clean. "I will not abandon you. You may serve as my maidservant and accompany me if you wish." Alara nodded to herself as though she had been waiting for Asha to ask. "I will consider your offer," she said back to Asha, but it was clearly the only real choice she had. Before Asha could respond, there was a pounding on the door. It startled both women. Alara made a motion to move to answer. Asha gestured for her to stay where she was and changed direction to approach the door. Just as she got near it, there was another round of knocks. They were very loud and very confident, like they owned the place. Asha pulled the door open. 3 medium-sized Boboroi in complete Storm Reaper armor stood beside 2 big sealed boxes. Their presence surprised Asha, but her nerves had been so rattled over the past several months that simple surprise barely registered a reaction anymore. Compliments of General Gratian Maxim, the Storm Reaper with slightly more ornate markings on his armor, said. "The caravan leaves in a blink from the east gate," he said, and all 3 turned and walked away before Asha could recover from the surprise. She looked around at the crowded alleyway. "Come help me, Alara," she said. "We need to get these 2 crates inside before they attract the wrong kind of attention." Later, a blink was 3 days. Asha and Alara used the first day to inventory the crates. One was filled with medicinal supplies, some items even Alara was unfamiliar with, and others that she showed extreme reverence for. There were balms and powders to mix into potions. Asha found the most helpful an elementary item, an elastic thin cloth wrap that she could run around her middle that somehow put the right amount of pressure on her ribs to lessen the discomfort significantly. By the second day, she felt orders of magnitude better. By the morning of the 3rd day, as they prepared to depart, Asha felt as good as she had since stepping onto Boboroi territory all those moons ago. She wasn't anywhere close to fully healed, but her head was clear, and while her body still hurt in many places, the pain registered but was manageable. She suspected that some combination of the herbs and powders the old woman mixed from the crate helped her mentally isolate the discomfort. The contents of the 2nd crate had been even more of a pleasant surprise. There were food items of the finest quality and 4 separate sets of what struck Asha as very regal attire, traveling clothes of someone very important. Everything was in her size. Asha and Alara had packed a wooden cart that Alara owned. It included all the remaining items delivered in the crates, a few personal things of Alara's, and some of her clothes. They also were sure to pack Dragon's skull, which had been delivered to them early the morning of the 2nd day. His skull was Asha's ancestor now. They both knew that neither of them would ever return to Orikor. Asha couldn't tell how Alara felt about it all. Alara had managed herself well after losing Dragon. She was much more emotionally reserved than usual. As the 2 worked out front of Alara's hut on the rickety old cart, the 3 Boboroi Storm Reapers returned, leading a huge, regal-looking horse-drawn coach. The lead Reaper approached Asha. He was in the same polished, decorated armor as a few days before. While he looked the same, Asha was a transformation. She wore one of the outfits provided for her, a bright purple and blue garment that was a combination of a dress and something more rugged for traveling. It had a raised collar that accentuated Asha's long, muscular neck and highlighted the symmetry of her features. The bandages were still present on her face. Alara had worked hard to apply them in a fashion that made it look like Asha was proud of the scars. Somehow, she had done so. Without any discussion, the 2 other Storm Reapers dismounted the driver's seats to the front of the cart and began transferring items out of the wheeled cart into the undercarriage of the coach. The lead Reaper indicated Asha and the coach door. "The General will ride with you for the first leg of our journey. You 2 have much to discuss," he offered Asha his hand to help her step into the wonderfully ornate coach. Asha indicated that Alara should board first. The lead Reaper blocked the move. "Your maidservant will ride with the other servants," he said. His voice had the brutal undertones of the Boboroi. Asha reminded herself that these were brutal people and not to lower her guard. The lead Reaper saw her pause. "She will be safe and properly cared for until we stop and she returns to your side. Do not worry," he said, still holding his hand for Asha to take. Alara saw Asha was still hesitant. Child, I have survived this long. I doubt a cart ride at the back of the caravan will be my doom. Asha nodded and accepted the lead reaper's hand. She stepped into the interior of the coach, which was magnificent. The inside was bright, regal fabric colors with two padded benches on either side. There were a few silk pillows. The entire interior screamed royalty. There was a giant of a man seated on one of the benches. Asha sat across from him on the other bench. The man wore the markings of the lead demon who had spoken with Asha, leaning forward on his bent knee from the observation platform, even though he was not in the same armor, but instead traveling clothes similar in quality to the ones Asha wore. Up close, he looked nothing like Asha had imagined. It was impossible to gauge his age. He wasn't young. He carried many visible scars from combat, but he wasn't old either. There were hard edges to him. His eyes seemed weary from having seen too much, but there was a youthful energy to the way he moved. He had red hair and piercing bright green eyes. And, unlike as she had feared, there was a very human face under the skull mask he had been wearing while sitting at the trial. His beard was well trimmed and just as red as his hair. The man's jaw was square, and Asha could see thick neck muscles at the collar where his royal blue vest ended. He watched her as she settled. His gaze was judging and intense, but it never felt threatening, which was remarkable because everything else in the land of the Babaroi did feel threatening. They sat in silence as the coach was loaded. Asha glanced at Maxim a few times, but mostly kept her eyes on the floor. She felt the storage area door close, then the rocking of the coach as the drivers climbed onto the front. Then, without any delay, the horses began pulling it forward. It was early morning, and they were heading out of the east gate, heading directly toward the sunrise. Asha glanced out the window a few times. She saw the long shadows and the people standing to either side of the narrow city streets, watching the spectacle, safely out of the way. Maxim finally spoke. Asha, causing fear and something else to jolt her. She looked up and made eye contact, which was a mistake. She quickly turned her gaze to the window. She wanted to say, "Yes, master," in keeping with the rules Alara gave her for dealing with the high-ranking Babaroi, but she found herself out of breath at the idea. It was an odd sensation. "Yes," she ended up muttering. "You are very lucky to be here, Gunta." He used a term Alara had told her about that basically meant student. Asha felt like she was falling. There were butterflies in her stomach, but she was able to get a hold of herself. "Yes, master," she said formally, feeling very lightheaded. "That was your only warning, Gunta. You have much work to do to be ready to audition for our Overleague team." His voice was firm but kind. Asha snapped back, her butterflies gone. "Audition?" She heard herself protest before she could catch herself. "You don't think we would accept a new team member based upon a short conversation in a backwater underleague arena, do you?" Maxim was studying her. Asha centered herself. "You are right, master. That was presumptive of me." Asha was screaming at herself in her head, reminding herself that this was her only option to get across the Babaroi lands, and that it was a near miracle to have lined it up. The few polite words that kept her hopes alive were easy to swallow in the greater context. "We have a blink here together in this coach. I will instruct you on things you should already know, but do not. Then you will have a tribulation. Then the other demons will decide your fate. Do not worry, I am the best teacher the Babaroi have." His smile was cruel. "Yes, master," she said, her nervousness returned. She looked out the window and saw they were nearing the gate. Everything now would be new to her. She had never ventured this far into the city, and once they left the gate, she would be in the lands of the Babaroi, yet untraveled for her. "Asha, you have been brought up to perceive our customs and our entire way of life as a disorderly mixture of violence and cruelty. However, it is crucial that you comprehend that there is a method to the madness, a meticulously crafted structure that has been refined over countless generations," Maxim explained, his words resonating with the confident cadence of someone certain of his logic. Asha's muscles tensed involuntarily. She had been ready to view Maxim, and by extension the Babaroi culture, through a lens of uncomplicated hatred. Yet the complexity and consideration underlying his words struck her with an unsettling dissonance. She was becoming frustrated with herself as well. There was something about Maxim that was affecting her physically. She did not understand why she remained so unsettled and nervous. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, before continuing. The Babaroi Empire is a sprawling tapestry of various tribes, clans, and cultures, stretching over lands so diverse you can't even begin to imagine. Unity is a rarity, an expensive commodity. Now, how does one maintain a semblance of order in such a chaotic expanse? The Overleague and the Match are our answers. They serve as a pressure valve, a way to channel innate aggression, the deep-seated animosity that exists between our people, into a form that we can control. It brings us a sense of order, a chain of command, and a method for disputes to be settled without plunging the entire empire into chaos. Asha listened intently, surprised by the methodical philosophy behind what she had always perceived as mere savagery. Maxim's voice had a cadence to it that matched the vibration of the coach as it gently swayed and rode through the final edge of the city and out into the lands beyond. Maxim's eyes darkened as he shifted to a more ominous subject. Our war with the citizens of Kemet in the Dark Lands stems from a similar necessity. Resources are finite, Asha. Outside of your precious capital city of Atlantis, the rest of the world is not as lucky. In a world that's always teetering on the brink of collapse, the strong survive and the weak serve or perish. Kemet harbors resources that we need. It's that simple. They can either share or be made to share. Their reluctance warrants our military intervention. He leaned closer, his eyes meeting Asha's, as if challenging her to refute his claims. You might find this brutal, but it's a consistency born from the reality of our world. It's our philosophy. We don't romanticize life. We don't deceive ourselves with lofty ideals of altruism. We understand the world for what it is, a harsh, unforgiving place that respects only strength and resolve. Life is a series of battles, a constant match, if you will. Those who adapt survive. Those who don't fall. The arena is a microcosm of our world, our empire. He paused for a moment to let his words resonate in the confined space of the coach, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic clatter of hooves against the sandy terrain. Asha felt the intensity of his gaze. She realized she was starting to perspire and that she was getting warm in the layers of royal clothing she wore. "Ah, I see that look on your face," Maxim said, a hint of satisfaction edging into his voice. She felt a wave of fear. He knew what he was doing to her. He had some ability to manipulate her using her base, primal emotions. Maxim continued, "You're beginning to grasp the intricacies of our way of life. It's an acquired taste, perhaps, but one that serves its function admirably. We've managed to carve out an empire from this inhospitable world and hold it together, not through fanciful notions of morality or justice, but through sheer will, raw power, and a systematic channeling of our basest instincts into something, well, productive." Maxim sat back, folding his arms across his chest. "You feel those base instincts now. I can see it. Your body has needs, Asha, needs that no oath can fulfill." Her head was spinning. Her stomach tightened as he continued speaking. She was struggling to focus. "You've won your freedom by understanding and exploiting a loophole in our law, a law built to maintain the very order I've explained. Now you've chosen to join us, and in doing so, you've acknowledged the efficacy of our methods, brutal though they may be. In the Citadel, you'll find more of the same, the unvarnished, unmitigated essence of what it means to be Babaroi. There's a twisted beauty in our way of life, Asha, and whether you realize it or not, you've already started to dance to our tune." She closed her eyes and forced herself to regain control. Whatever had just happened was fading. Sunlight heated her face as the coach turned. The warmth was on the wrong side of her face, but she couldn't figure out why. Maxim seemed proud of himself. "I've told you about the Overleague and the Match as tools for societal regulation, but you should understand that these are not mere blood sports. They're intricate rituals, sacred rites that embody the history, the culture, the very essence of the Babaroi people," he said. A chill ran down her spine, but she was back to herself. "We have our stories, myths, and legends just as any other civilization, just as your kingdom of Atlantis does. For us, these narratives converge in the arena, where each combatant becomes an actor in an age-old drama, reenacting the struggles that forged us, that continue to forge us," Maxim added. Asha felt a strange mix of horror and intrigue. There was a structure, a tapestry of meaning she hadn't seen before. This wasn't chaos. This was orchestrated savagery. She had a clarity now of understanding that was new. Something in her had just been changed. Ah, you seem to be grappling with some inner turmoil, Maxim acknowledged, a wry smile forming on his lips. Good. That's the first step to understanding, to really seeing the world for what it is. We Babaroi hold a mirror to nature. We don't try to paint over its cracks. Asha sighed, her earlier prejudices clashing with this newfound insight into the complexities of the Babaroi world. She felt like a ship caught in a storm, battered by waves of conflicting ideologies. The rhythm of the cart brought a sense of peace and calm she had not felt in what seemed like forever. She held her hand up to shade her eyes from the morning sun. She realized something was wrong with the sun, but tried to push the thought away to maintain her inner calm. Maxim sensed her inner peace and continued, his voice softening. Now, you might be wondering how we reconcile our warlike nature with the governing principles of a complex society. That, my dear Asha, is where the Overleague and its subdivisions come into play. The very idea of having different leagues and competitions, governed by an overarching set of rules and codes, creates layers of societal order. Asha listened, transfixed. It was as if Maxim was revealing the hidden cogs and gears of a monstrous machine she had only glimpsed from the outside, not ready to comprehend until now. But while the Overleague provides us with a framework, remember that each match is unique, a different tale in a grand anthology. Each outcome serves as a case study, a lesson in what to do or not to do in real life. We extract principles from these confrontations and apply them to the actual governance of our empire, Maxim said. This was astonishing to Asha. She had always looked at the Babaroi as brutes who reveled in barbarity for its own sake. But what Maxim described was something far more nuanced. It was a cyclical philosophy, an ecosystem of ideas that fed off and nourished each other. It's the same with our war with the citizens of Kemet to the north, Maxim elaborated, his eyes narrowing. We extend our philosophy beyond the arena, applying the same brutal but logical principles to our external relations. We're simply extending the battleground, using the same rules and tenets that have served us so well within the empire. And I assure you, those who have lived long enough under our rule learn to understand its necessity, even its fairness. Asha felt a jarring sense of clarity. The twisted philosophy of the Babaroi was not random cruelty. It was a system, a brutal one, but a system nonetheless. So you see, Asha, you're not joining a society of mindless savages, Maxim concluded. You're becoming a part of a rigorous, complex, albeit harsh reality. We're not monsters, we're realists. We understand the world in a way others shy away from, and I sense, so do you. As the coach moved through the vast desert, Asha felt a complex tapestry of emotions unravel within her. Revulsion, curiosity, horror, and, most unsettling of all, a sense of understanding. She was beginning to see the world through Babaroi eyes, and it was a view that was as terrifying as it was fascinating. Then it all fell away, and cold fear returned. She was riding sitting on the bench that faced the rear of the coach, but she had her right hand up to block the morning sunlight, not her left. That meant they were heading south, not east and north. Wherever they were going, it was not to the Citadel. "Where are we going?" she yelled as soon as she realized the direction they had turned. Maxim, with lightning reflexes so fast Asha did not see the swing, backhanded her, landing a hard blow to her face that turned her head and stung. "I told you that you had used up all your warnings, Gunta," he said in his kind voice. Whatever exhilaration Asha had felt was gone, replaced with trepidation and apprehension, emotions she was all too familiar with here in the lands of the Babaroi. "Where are we going, master?" she forced herself to say as quickly as she could, her ears ringing from the blow. "You are astute, and I appreciate that you are aware of your surroundings, Gunta," he said as though nothing had happened. "Your education will have a final exam of sorts. We are heading to the lands of the horse masters. We will make war in Equinara." Known in whispered rumors and folklore as the lands of the horse masters, Asha knew Equinara was more warlike and malevolent than even the Babaroi. The verdant hills and grasslands of Equinara belied its populace's thirst for dominance and cruelty. They, too, had their rituals and rites, but these were said to be blood-soaked ceremonies meant to forge unbreakable bonds between warriors and their mystical horses, bonds strengthened by acts so heinous they were only spoken of in hushed tones. Far from being keepers of ancient traditions, the Equinara were regarded as merciless conquerors who believed their divine calling was to subjugate all realms through dread and terror. The Equinara's war philosophy was not built on individual strength and merit, like the Babaroi, but on an eerie, collective drive for ruthless expansion. The darkness of their intent contrasted sharply with their outward appearance of tranquility and natural beauty. It was a dichotomy that unnerved Asha more than any Babaroi combat arena ever could. Her dread began to mount, an oppressive weight on her shoulders, as reality sank in. She would soon find herself in a land that not only questioned, but also darkly mirrored the Babaroi's ways. Where the Babaroi sought to control through visible, palpable feats of strength, the Equinara sought it through secretive, unspeakable acts of malice. She would be tested in a realm whose very nature was antithetical to everything she had come to understand about power, justice, and morality. As the wheels of the royal coach plowed through the desert sands, each turn deepened her sense of impending doom, drawing her nearer to a destiny fraught with unimaginable perils and ethical labyrinths. But being a quick gunta, Asha smartly pushed all that away and looked Maxim in the eye with as much fire and false bravado as she could muster. "Yes, master," she said. The end. Asha of Atlantis will continue in the next story, Riders of Atlantis.